For months, no nanny had managed to last a single day with the millionaire's 5 rebellious children. But everything changes when a woman in a wheelchair crosses the gates of the mansion everyone fears. She carries not only experience, but a courage forged by pain and overcoming. What seemed like another announced failure transforms into a story of love, healing, and unexpected redemption. The electronic gate of the Montgomery mansion opened with a metallic creak. Eleanor Finch adjusted the position of her wheelchair and took a deep breath before activating the remote. The wheels advanced along the polished stone path that led to the main entrance of the most talked-about house in Greenwich, an affluent suburban town in Connecticut. Her 42 years weighed less than the determination she carried with her. That neoclassical mansion, surrounded by carefully manicured gardens with dogwoods and azaleas, was known in the region as the nanny graveyard. 17 professionals had already given up in the last 6 months. Eleanor knew this. All the city's employment agencies commented on the case with a mix of curiosity and compassion. "Are you sure you wish to continue with the interview?" the agency receptionist had asked, her eyes fixed on the wheelchair. "Mr. Montgomery has 5 rather challenging children." Eleanor merely smiled. Challenges were old acquaintances of hers. 14 years ago, when she worked as a special education teacher at a public school in Chicago, a school trip accident left her paraplegic. 3 years of recovery, endless therapies, and a complete redefinition of identity forged in her, a patience that seemed supernatural to outside observers. The imposing manor house stood before her. Through the wide windows, Eleanor could distinguish quick movements of children running between rooms. The doorbell sounded like an alarm, and she waited, feeling the cold air of the suburban hills caress her face. She mentally rehearsed the answers she would give during the interview. The offered salary was 3 times the market rate, an amount that could, finally, secure the experimental treatment her doctor had suggested. The door opened with a jerk, revealing a man of approximately 45 years old, with graying temples and deep circles under his eyes that betrayed sleepless nights. Henry Montgomery, a real estate mogul and widower for 2 years, looked as worn as the mansion itself. "Ms. Finch?" he asked, and his eyes quickly scanned her wheelchair. Eleanor recognized that gaze, a mix of surprise, doubt, and inevitably distrust. "Please come in." As he guided her through the marble-clad entrance hall, Henry explained the house rules with the impersonality of someone reciting a contract. Eleanor listened attentively, while her observant eyes caught revealing details: toys strategically scattered like booby traps, a recent red stain on the spiral staircase, and the complete absence of family photographs on walls that must have once displayed happy portraits. "My assistant mentioned that you have experience with special needs children," Henry commented, leading her to the library that served as his office. "Believe me, my children have no diagnosis other than extreme longing." His voice faltered on the last part, and Eleanor noticed how he quickly composed himself, adjusting his navy blue tie, as if that gesture could rearrange his emotions as well. "I have 15 years of experience in early childhood education, Mr. Montgomery, and I've spent the last 7 developing methods of emotional communication with children in traumatic situations," she replied softly. "Longing is a condition I know well, both professionally and personally." Henry sat behind the rosewood desk, absent-mindedly flipping through Eleanor's resume. "Impressive," he murmured, "but I'm afraid your qualifications are irrelevant in the face of the chaos you'll encounter here. The children have a method for driving nannies away." As if on a rehearsed cue, a muffled thud came from upstairs, followed by children's laughter and the sound of running footsteps. Henry closed his eyes for an instant, as if seeking patience from some almost empty reservoir. "They lost their mother 2 years ago in an accident on the highway, connecting Greenwich to New York City," he explained, with a coldness Eleanor immediately recognized as a defense mechanism. She was the heart of this home. The office, with its shelves crammed with legal books and business awards, contrasted with a single photo on the desk: a woman with curly hair and a luminous smile, embracing 5 children on a beach Eleanor recognized as Martha's Vineyard. Henry discreetly turned the photo frame face down. "I'd like to meet the children before we finalize any agreement," Eleanor requested, maneuvering her chair towards the door. Henry's sigh was as deep as it was resigned. "Certainly, but I must warn you that they can be creative in their welcome. As they exited the office, a small figure quickly darted behind a column. Eleanor smiled internally. Observation was the first step of childish distrust, something completely expected. The tour of the house was a gradual revelation of emotional neglect, disguised as opulence. Impeccably decorated rooms, but without warmth. Expensive toys gathering dust on high shelves. An industrial kitchen, where no one seemed to cook family meals. The mansion was like a perfectly staged set for a play no one performed anymore. "Michael is 14, Henry explained as they ascended in the elevator installed beside the main staircase, an adaptation Eleanor noted with approval. The twins, Louisa and Laura, are 9. Leo turned 6 last month, and the youngest, Beatrice, is 4. I hope your condition won't prevent you from attending to their needs." Eleanor absorbed the insinuation without flinching. "My condition, Mr. Montgomery, taught me that there are many ways to achieve a goal. No child needs a nanny who runs faster. They need someone who stands firm when everyone else gives up." The answer seemed to disarm him momentarily. The elevator stopped on the 2nd floor, and as the doors opened, a chaotic sight was revealed. The hallway leading to the bedrooms was transformed into a veritable minefield of shoelaces tied between doorknobs, creating a complicated web of obstacles. "Apparently, this is the reception planned for you," Henry commented, with a tone that mixed embarrassment with an almost imperceptible hint of curiosity about how she would handle the situation. Eleanor observed the shoelace labyrinth with technical attention. Instead of showing frustration, she simply smiled and took a small pair of scissors from her bag. "Ingenious," she commented, genuinely admiring the complexity of the arrangement. "It requires planning, teamwork, and a basic understanding of physics. You have brilliant children, Mr. Montgomery." She began to cut through the obstacles methodically, advancing down the hallway. "When I was a teacher, I always told my students that creativity is a gift, even when used to test limits." A tense silence reigned, but Eleanor knew she was being watched. Her years working with children had refined her perception of their presence, even when they tried to hide. As they reached the door of the first bedroom, deafening music started playing through the ceiling's built-in speakers. It was heavy rock, at a volume that would make any ordinary person cover their ears and recoil. Henry made a move to turn off the system, but Eleanor stopped him with a gesture. Instead, she closed her eyes and began to move to the rhythm of the music, her hands gliding over the wheels of her chair in a kind of improvised dance. When she opened her eyes again, she noticed movement in the half-open bedroom door. A pair of adolescent eyes watched her with a mix of surprise and reluctant respect. "Linkin Park. Numb," she commented when the music abruptly stopped. "Excellent choice. That song helped me a lot during my rehabilitation." The bedroom door opened completely, revealing a tall, thin teenager with dark hair partially covering defiant eyes. Michael Montgomery stared at the new nanny candidate with the posture of someone who had seen 17 adults flee that house. "You won't last a week," he stated, crossing his arms. "That's an interesting prediction," Eleanor replied calmly. "But do you know what I've learned over time, Michael? That the best stories begin precisely when someone doubts the main character." The boy's eyes narrowed, evaluating the woman before him. For a brief moment, something akin to curiosity crossed his gaze. Suddenly, a sharp cry erupted from one of the bedrooms at the end of the hallway. Henry sighed, running his hand over his face in a gesture of familiar weariness. "That's Leo. He cries whenever he meets someone new," he explained. But Eleanor was already moving towards the sound. As she approached the half-open door, she slowed down and softened her approach. Instead of entering, she stopped at the threshold and lowered her voice to a calm, melodious tone. "Hello, Leo. My name is Eleanor." "Like a bird, you know. I know it's scary to meet new people. You don't have to stop crying because of me. Sometimes crying is important. I'll be right out here waiting when you feel ready to meet me." The crying gradually subsided, replaced by intermittent sobs and a silent curiosity. A small figure partially appeared in the crack of the door, a boy with red eyes from crying so much, clutching a worn stuffed dinosaur. In another bedroom, Eleanor noticed movement. The twins were strategically positioned, observing her through a half-open door, whispering to each other in a language that seemed an enigmatic mix of sounds. She waved at them naturally, as if she perfectly understood what they were saying. "Your father mentioned you are Louisa and Laura. Nice to meet you. Tomorrow when I start, I'd love to learn some words of your language." The girls exchanged surprised glances. None of the previous nannies had shown any interest in their secret code. Normally, this behavior was a source of frustration for adults who tried to communicate with them. "Where's Beatrice?" Eleanor asked, addressing Henry, who observed the interaction with a mix of disbelief and faint hope. "Probably hiding," he replied, checking his watch. "I have a video conference in 15 minutes. Can we finalize the contract details?" Eleanor noticed how he used work as a shield against the emotional discomfort of being present with his children. "Certainly," she replied. "But first, I'd like to make something clear. If we accept this agreement, I will need autonomy to implement my methods. It won't work if there's constant interference or contradictory rules." Henry hesitated, clearly unaccustomed to conditions imposed by employees. "What kind of methods?" "Emotional consistency, Mr. Montgomery, predictability and security. And most importantly, space to process grief in an age-appropriate way," she replied with professional firmness. "No child overcomes a loss by pretending it doesn't exist." Her words hung in the air like a silent challenge. For a moment, Eleanor saw the mask of business efficiency falter, revealing the devastated man who hid behind it. "Start tomorrow at 7, she stated, not as a question but as a decision already made. "And I'd like a list of all allergies, dietary preferences and school schedules." As they headed back to the elevator, Eleanor felt a slight pressure on her chair's wheel. Looking down, she found a little girl with curly hair and large, attentive eyes, who quickly moved away when noticed. "Hello, Beatrice," she said softly. "You have a very gentle touch. Tomorrow when I come back, I'll bring my special colored pencils. Maybe we can draw together if you'd like." The girl didn't respond, but her curious eyes followed Eleanor until the elevator doors closed. Leaving the mansion, while Henry arranged the necessary paperwork, Eleanor observed the property with analytical eyes. Beneath the architectural perfection and the beauty of the well-kept gardens, there was a house in deep suffering. 5 children and a father trying to survive an absence no one allowed themselves to mention. "You understand I'm offering this salary because the situation is extreme?" Henry asked, handing her the contract. "No nanny has managed to handle them for more than a week." Eleanor signed the documents with the tranquility of someone who deeply understood the value of her own work. "Mr. Montgomery, I'm afraid you've misunderstood what's happening here. It's not the children who drive away the nannies. It's unprocessed grief that does." She returned the signed contract, adjusting her position in her chair. "Until tomorrow at 7 o'clock. As the gate closed behind her, Eleanor felt the weight of the responsibility she had just accepted. Those children had built fortresses around their hearts, and she would have to use every ounce of her experience and intuition to find an entrance. But unlike the 17 women who came before her, Eleanor intimately knew the language of irreparable losses and the art of rebuilding a life from shattered pieces. In the accessible taxi that took her back to her small rented apartment in downtown Greenwich, she mentally reviewed her plan for the first day. Michael would be the hardest. Teenagers always are. The twins would need time and genuine curiosity. Leah would need predictability and infinite patience. And little Beatrice. She would primarily need silent presence, someone who knew how to wait. The challenge was immense, but for the first time in many years, Eleanor felt she had found exactly where she needed to be. A broken home, wounded children, and a father lost in his own labyrinth of guilt. Familiar territory for someone who had spent her life transforming pain into possibilities. At 6:30 in the morning, Eleanor was already on her way to the Montgomery mansion. The accessible taxi driver, Mr. Jenkins, an elderly gentleman with grey hair and an easy smile, looked at her in the rearview mirror as they ascended the winding road leading to Greenwich's affluent district. "Are you sure you want to go to the Montgomery's house? Everyone in town knows those children are—" He hesitated, searching for an adequate word. "Complicated." Eleanor adjusted her wool scarf against the cold morning air of the hills. "Children aren't born complicated, Mr. Jenkins. They become complicated when they don't know how to process what they feel." The taxi driver shook his head admiringly. "You're brave." They say the last nanny ran screaming after the twins put a snake in her pillow. Was it a real snake? Eleanor asked, genuinely curious. No, a rubber one. But so realistic that the poor woman had a fit. Eleanor smiled. Creativity and planning. Those girls have potential. As they arrived at the mansion gate, Eleanor saw that Henry was already waiting for her at the entrance, impatiently consulting his watch. Dressed in an impeccable suit and holding an executive briefcase, he was the perfect image of the businessman too busy for his own emotions. "Good morning." "Mr. Montgomery," she greeted as she disembarked with Mr. Jenkins' help, who assembled her chair with the skill of someone who had been doing it for months. "I appreciate your punctuality. I need to leave for a meeting in Philadelphia. I won't be back until tonight," he explained, handing her a set of keys and a paper with notes. "Here's everything you need to know: schedules, emergency contacts, dietary restrictions. My chauffeur will take the children to school at 7:30 a.m. Eleanor quickly studied the list. "I see that only Michael, Louisa, and Laura attend school. Leo and Beatrice stay home. Leo was asked to withdraw from preschool after a series of incidents, and Beatrice refuses to stay away from home since—" He cut off the sentence, looking away. "I hired private tutors, but they also gave up." "I understand," Eleanor nodded, carefully storing the information. "Any specific guidance for today?" Henry seemed uncomfortable with the question. "Just keep them alive and the house intact," he replied with an attempt at humor that sounded more like desperation. "I'll try to exceed those expectations, Mr. Montgomery," she retorted, smiling. "Have a good day." As Henry's car disappeared around the bend in the driveway, Eleanor took a deep breath and faced the mansion. The real challenge would begin now. Upon entering, she was met by a suspiciously complete silence. The kitchen, large and equipped with state-of-the-art appliances, was empty, although a coffee maker was still on, exuding the aroma of fresh coffee. Eleanor checked her watch. 6:45 a.m. According to Henry's list, the children should be preparing for breakfast. "Good morning, everyone," she announced loudly as she made her way to the stairs. "My name is Eleanor, and I'm here to help you with your morning routine." No response, just the echo of her own voice bouncing off the marble walls. Calmly, she activated the elevator and ascended to the second floor. The hallway that the day before was full of traps now seemed intact. Perhaps, Eleanor thought, they were planning something more elaborate for her first official day. She stopped before the first door, decorated with rock band stickers and a handwritten sign, "Enter at your own risk." Michael's room. She knocked gently. "Michael, the chauffeur will be here in 45 minutes. There's coffee ready in the kitchen." Silence. After waiting a few seconds, Eleanor proceeded to the next room. Identified by two colorful plaques with the names Louisa and Laura, painted in completely different styles, one organized and meticulous, the other exuberant and chaotic. "Girls? Good morning. Do you need help getting ready for school?" She heard whispers in their secret code, but no direct answer. She continued down the hallway, reaching Leo's room decorated with dinosaurs. The door was ajar. "Leo? Good morning, dear. Remember me? I'm Eleanor." Movement inside the room caught her attention. The boy was sitting on the floor in the space between the bed and the wall, hugging the same stuffed dinosaur from the day before, his eyes wide and vigilant. "You really like that dinosaur, don't you?" Eleanor commented, without trying to enter the room, respecting his space. "Does he have a name?" Leo didn't respond verbally, but clutched the toy more tightly to his chest. "You know, I had a stuffed turtle named Slowpoke when I was a child," Eleanor recounted, creating a connection. "She went everywhere with me that I was scared to go alone." The boy's gaze subtly shifted, a cautious curiosity emerging. "Rex," he murmured finally, so low that Eleanor almost didn't hear. "Rex is an excellent name for a strong dinosaur," she smiled. "Would you and Rex like to have breakfast?" "I'm thinking of making pancakes." Leo seemed to consider the proposal, his eyes moving from the toy to Eleanor and back. "With chocolate syrup?" he asked timidly. "If there's any in the kitchen, absolutely," she replied. "Want to help me check?" The boy slowly got up, still clutching the dinosaur. He didn't approach, but he also didn't retreat when Eleanor began to move away in her chair, a silent invitation for him to follow her. The last room in the hallway had its door completely closed, decorated only with a small butterfly-shaped plaque with the name Beatrice. Eleanor knocked gently. "Good morning, Beatrice. I'm going to the kitchen to make pancakes with chocolate. Syrup, you're welcome to join us whenever you like." Without waiting for a response, she continued on her way, noticing that Leo was now following her at a safe distance, like a small satellite cautiously orbiting. In the kitchen, Eleanor found an intriguing scenario. All the chairs had been stacked, forming a barricade in front of the refrigerator, and a trail of something sticky, probably honey, had been strategically spread across the floor. Looks like we have a morning challenge," she commented, analyzing the situation with the tranquility of someone who already expected obstacles. "Leo, do you think you can tell me where the cleaning cloths are? We'll need to sort this out before the pancakes." The boy, still keeping his distance, pointed to a cabinet under the sink. Eleanor thanked him with a smile and methodically approached the mess. Instead of showing irritation, she began to reorganize the space as if she were facing an interesting puzzle. "You know," she said aloud, certain she was being observed, "when I was a teacher, we used honey for a fascinating scientific experiment on viscosity. It's a truly impressive material from a physical standpoint." As she spoke, Eleanor dismantled the barricade of chairs piece by piece, reorganizing the space. She found the cleaning cloths and, with calculated movements, began to remove the honey from the floor. Her wheelchair made it difficult to reach some spots, but she had developed efficient techniques over the years. A slight noise at the top of the stairs caught her attention. The twins were observing, half hidden. Louisa and Laura, identical in appearance but distinct in posture, wore the school uniform of St. Clair's Academy, one of the most traditional schools in the suburban hills. Their dark, curly hair was perfectly styled, which contrasted with the mischievous expressions on their faces. "Good morning, girls," Eleanor waved as if finding them peeking were perfectly normal. "Do you like pancakes?" The twins exchanged glances and whispers in their secret code, before descending the stairs with synchronized steps, a practiced choreography that made them seem even more identical. "Bidenar doesn't like pancakes," said one of them, whom Eleanor presumed to be Louisa, by the way she articulated words with calculated precision. "Ranori prefers tapioca," completed the other Laura with a challenging smile. Eleanor didn't miss a beat. "Are Bidenar and Ranori you, or are they imaginary friends?" she asked with genuine interest, without judgment in her voice. The twins seemed momentarily disconcerted by the direct question, probably expecting her to pretend to understand or get annoyed by the code. "We are us in Calariana," Louisa replied, testing the new nanny's reaction. "Calariana is your world," Eleanor continued, placing the last dirty cloth in the sink and washing her hands. "That's fascinating. You created an entire language?" Before they could answer, the sound of heavy footsteps announced Michael's arrival. The teenager appeared at the kitchen door, cell phone in one hand and headphones in the other, his school uniform deliberately disheveled as a form of rebellion. "Are the pancakes just a pathetic attempt to buy our sympathy?" he asked, leaning against the doorframe with studied adolescent indifference. "Not at all," Eleanor replied sincerely. "They're just pancakes. Food shouldn't come with emotional conditions attached." Michael frowned, clearly not expecting that answer. He shrugged, trying to maintain his facade of disinterest, but moved into the kitchen, sitting on one of the chairs Eleanor had just reorganized. Eleanor opened the refrigerator, now accessible, and began to gather the ingredients. "Can someone tell me where the frying pans are? And do we have chocolate syrup?" as Leo asked. The dynamic in the kitchen subtly changed. The twins, still occasionally using their secret language, began to indicate where the items were. Michael, feigning disinterest, occasionally corrected his sister's information. Leo, who had found a safe spot in a corner, observed everything with attentive eyes. Rex firmly clutched to his chest. While preparing the batter, Eleanor chatted casually, asking simple questions about school, dietary preferences, gradually establishing a normalcy the house hadn't seemed to know for a long time. "And Beatrice?" she asked, flipping the first pancake in the air with skill, eliciting a surprised look from the twins. "Does she usually have breakfast? She only eats when she wants to," Michael replied, his tone suggesting a concern he tried to hide under indifference. "Sometimes she stays in her room all morning." "She hides food," Laura added, receiving a reprimanding glare from her brother. "What? It's true," "We found cookies and fruit under her bed," Louisa explained. "Daddy said it's a phase, but it's been going on for a year." Eleanor absorbed the information without commenting, recognizing the behavior as typical of children who developed food insecurity after trauma. Instead, she set aside a special pancake, decorating it with chocolate syrup in the shape of a flower. Could someone take this to Beatrice? No pressure for her to eat, just an invitation. The twins exchanged glances again, communicating silently. "She won't accept it," Louisa said. "Not from a stranger," Laura completed. Eleanor nodded, understanding. "Then I'll leave it here on the counter, in case she changes her mind." Breakfast proceeded with an underlying tension Eleanor knew was natural. The children watched her, evaluated her, waiting for the moment she would reveal her true nature. Irritable, controlling, or worse, falsely cheerful like the previous nannies, who tried to win them over with artificial enthusiasm. But Eleanor was just present. Genuine in her interactions, real in her limitations, patient with occasional provocations. When the chauffeur arrived to take Michael and the twins to school, Eleanor accompanied them to the door. "Have a good day," she simply wished. "I'll be here when you get back." Michael rolled his eyes. "If you're still here," he muttered, but there was a note of uncertainty in his voice, as if he was no longer so confident in his ability to scare away this new nanny. The twins waved with perfect synchronicity before getting into the car, whispering again in their code. Eleanor believed she distinguished her name among the incomprehensible sounds. Back in the kitchen, she found Leo still sitting in the same spot, watching her silently. And to her surprise, the pancake she had left for Beatrice had disappeared from the counter. "Well, it looks like it's just me, you and Rex now," she commented, smiling at the boy. "How about you show me your dinosaur collection after we finish tidying up the kitchen?" The boy nodded shyly. During the next hour, as they organized the kitchen together, Leo taking on small tasks Eleanor carefully delegated, she heard him speak more words than Henry had probably heard in months. Short sentences, still hesitant, but remarkable progress for a child described as having uncontrollable crying fits. The rest of the morning passed with a precarious calm, like the quiet before a storm. Leo showed his impressive dinosaur collection, explaining with surprising knowledge the differences between herbivores and carnivores. Beatrice remained invisible, although Eleanor occasionally noticed furtive movements in the hallway, signs that the youngest was observing her from afar. Around noon, Eleanor began preparations for lunch. Consulting Henry's notes, she discovered there was a cook, Mrs. Higgins, who came 3 times a week to leave prepared meals. On other days, previous nannies were supposed to follow a strict menu established by a nutritionist. In the refrigerator, she found perfectly labeled meals and detailed instructions. The impeccable organization amidst the emotional chaos of the house spoke volumes about Henry. External control as a substitute for the internal balance he lacked. While warming the food, Eleanor heard a noise coming from the living room. Upon investigating, she found Beatrice sitting on the Persian rug, drawing with colored pencils on sheets of paper. The girl, with her dark curls framing a concentrated face, didn't look up when Eleanor approached. "Those drawings are beautiful, Beatrice," Eleanor commented, maintaining a respectful distance. "You really like to draw, don't you?" The girl didn't respond but briefly stopped coloring, indicating she was listening. "Tomorrow I'll bring my special pencils, as I promised. I have colors that change depending on the light." Beatrice continued drawing, but Eleanor noticed her shoulders had relaxed slightly. Small progress, she thought. In emotional recovery, sometimes a quieter sigh was worth more than 1,000 words. "Lunch will be ready in 15 minutes. You're welcome to join us at the kitchen table, or I can bring a plate for you here, if you prefer." Leaving the girl with her drawings, Eleanor returned to the kitchen, where Leo was already waiting for her. Rex strategically positioned beside him on the table. Lunch was served, and to Eleanor's surprise, Beatrice silently appeared at the kitchen door minutes later, holding a sheet of paper. Without saying a word, the girl placed the drawing next to the plate Eleanor had prepared for her and sat down, staring fixedly at the food. Eleanor observed the drawing, a figure in a wheelchair surrounded by colorful dinosaurs. A simple yet deeply revealing representation, Beatrice had incorporated Eleanor into the safe world she shared with her brother. "Thank you for the drawing, Beatrice. I loved the dinosaurs. "Are they Rex's friends?" she asked softly, as she poured juice for the children. Beatrice didn't respond verbally, but looked at Leo, who nodded enthusiastically. "They're Rex's family," he explained, his voice more confident now. "The green one is the dad, the purple one is the mom, and the little ones are the siblings. A family of dinosaurs." Eleanor immediately recognized the projection. "They seem very close," she commented, without forcing interpretations. Lunch proceeded in relative silence, but of a different quality, less tense, more contemplative. After eating, Leo helped clear the table, while Beatrice silently returned to the living room, taking her drawing with her. The afternoon brought its first real test. Henry had left a note informing that Leo should complete literacy exercises with the nanny, as he no longer attended school. When Eleanor mentioned the task, the boy immediately shut down, hugging Rex with renewed force. "I don't want to," he declared, his eyes already welling up. "May I ask why?" Eleanor gently inquired. "Letters are hard," he replied, his voice trembling. "They should move." Eleanor immediately recognized the signs. "Leo, when you look at letters, do they seem to jump or dance on the page?" He looked at her in astonishment, as if she had read his thoughts. He nodded slowly. "And does that make you feel scared or embarrassed when you have to read aloud?" Another nod, accompanied by silent tears. "You know, that happens to many intelligent people," she explained, positioning her chair beside him. "It's called dyslexia. It doesn't mean you're not capable, just that your brain processes information differently. I had a student who saw letters dancing, and he became the best storyteller I ever knew." For the first time that day, Leo looked at her directly, hope emerging in his eyes. "Really?" "Absolutely true," Eleanor confirmed. "And there are many games and activities that can help. Do you want to try something different from traditional exercises?" For the next hour, Eleanor improvised multisensory activities she had developed during her time as a teacher, using Play-Doh to form letters, singing songs that associated sounds with images, creating an environment where learning was an experience, not an obligation. To her surprise, Beatrice silently approached and sat nearby, observing the activities with interest. By late afternoon, when the chauffeur returned bringing Michael and the twins from school, the atmosphere in the house had subtly changed. No trust had been established yet. It would be naive to expect that in just one day. But there was an emerging curiosity about this woman who didn't yell, didn't threaten, and most importantly, didn't pretend everything was fine. The twins entered talking animatedly in their code, but occasionally translated words for Eleanor, a small but significant invitation into their private world. Michael, though still distant, asked if he could use the kitchen for a science project, a request that suggested he no longer expected an immediate refusal, as he received from other nannies. When Henry finally returned, it was already past 8 in the evening. The children had had dinner, bathed, and were in their respective rooms, not exactly sleeping, Eleanor suspected, but at least in their safe spaces. "How was the day?" he asked, seeming genuinely surprised to find her still there. "Productive," Eleanor replied, putting away the last book she had read to Leo. "Your children are extraordinary. Mr. Montgomery, intelligent, creative, and deeply loyal to one another." Henry blinked, as if that were a description of completely different children than he knew. "There were no incidents?" "Define incidents," Eleanor smiled. "There were challenges, boundary tests, secret code communication, and some creative traps. Nothing unexpected for the first day." She observed how Henry's posture changed imperceptibly, a relaxing of his shoulders, a contained sigh. "Impressive," he murmured, more to himself than to her. "Mr. Montgomery," Eleanor adjusted her position in her chair, adopting a professional tone, "I'd like to discuss some initial observations, if you have a moment." He seemed momentarily uncomfortable, as if he feared criticism, but nodded, guiding her to the office. "I believe Leo shows signs of dyslexia," she began directly as soon as the door closed. "A professional evaluation would be important, and Beatrice shows behaviors consistent with separation anxiety, something completely understandable considering the circumstances." Henry sat heavily in his chair, absorbing the information. "And the recommendations would be, for Leo, adaptations in teaching methodology. For Beatrice, emotional consistency and security. For everyone, honestly. A space where they can process grief in an age-appropriate way. She observed how the word grief made Henry visibly stiffen. I intend to implement predictable routines, create safe emotional communication channels, and most importantly, Mr. Montgomery, allow them to feel what they need to feel. A heavy silence filled the office. Finally, Henry spoke, his voice almost inaudible. You think I'm failing them? It wasn't a question, but Eleanor answered anyway. I think you're surviving, in the only way you've found so far. But perhaps there are paths that allow for more than just survival. Henry looked up, meeting Eleanor's firm and compassionate gaze. For a brief moment, the mask of business efficiency fell completely, revealing only an exhausted, frightened man, overwhelmed by the responsibility of raising 5 children without the partner he had chosen for this journey. Tomorrow we will have a new opportunity, Eleanor said softly, heading for the door. I'll be here at 7. As the accessible taxi took her back to her apartment that night, Eleanor contemplated the challenges that still lay ahead. The first day had only been the surface. The children had tested her basic limits, observed her reactions, assessed her potential as a target. The real test, she knew, would begin when they realized she wouldn't be easily scared away. Michael, with his silent leadership and fierce protection of his siblings. The twins with their private world built as a refuge. Leo struggling with difficulties no one had recognized. Beatrice silently guarding her fears. And Henry, perhaps the most broken of all, hiding in work to avoid facing the void left in his home. Eleanor had no illusions about the magnitude of the challenge, but as she watched the lights of the suburban town from the taxi window, a calm certainty grew within her. That family was trapped in a pattern of pain that no one had been brave enough to interrupt. And if there was one thing Eleanor Finch had learned on her own journey of overcoming, it was that the most destructive patterns could be redrawn when someone finally dared to take the first step in a new direction. By the end of the first week, Eleanor had already established a routine at the Montgomery household. Each morning began with shared breakfast in the kitchen, a practice that initially met resistance, but gradually became an anticipated part of the day. Michael still maintained his defiant posture. The twins continued with their secret language. Leo communicated primarily through his dinosaurs, and Beatrice observed everything from a safe distance, moving a little closer each day. On Monday morning, the start of the second week, Eleanor arrived at the mansion and found an unexpected situation. Instead of the usual silence or elaborate traps, she was greeted by Henry, still home, sitting in the kitchen with a tense expression on his face. "Has something happened?" she asked, immediately alert. Henry pushed a leather planner towards her. "The children have doctor's appointments today. All of them. Routine checkups I've been postponing for months." Eleanor examined the planner. "I see they're scheduled at different times and locations across the city. I found out last night. Apparently the office called to confirm and Michael answered. He must have organized everything." Understanding illuminated Eleanor's face. "The first major test," she murmured. "What do you mean?" "Michael is testing my logistical limits," she explained, studying the overlapping times and locations spread across Greenwich. "It's a clever plan. How to take 5 children to simultaneous appointments in different parts of the city when you're in a wheelchair and dependent on accessible public transport." Henry ran a hand over his face, the weariness evident in his eyes. "I can reschedule everything, or ask my chauffeur to take them." "No," Eleanor interrupted firmly. "If we cancel now, we'll be sending the wrong message." "I'll handle it." "How?" he asked, genuinely curious. "By reorganizing priorities," she simply replied. "Do you trust me to make changes to the children's health schedule?" Henry hesitated, visibly uncomfortable with the idea of ceding control. "What kind of changes?" "Keep the most urgent appointments for today and reschedule the others for consecutive days, at times that make logistical sense." After a moment of consideration, he nodded. "Do whatever is necessary. I need to be in Chicago for an important meeting." "I understand," Eleanor replied without judgment in her voice, though she noted how Henry continued to prioritize work, even in the face of family challenges. "Are the children awake yet?" "Only Michael. He seems anxious this morning." of course, she thought. The architect of the plan waiting to see if his trap would work. I'll speak with him. She found Michael in his room, not with his usual casual posture, but sitting on the edge of his bed, staring fixedly at his cell phone, a nervous energy emanating from him. "Good morning, Michael," Eleanor greeted, remaining at the doorway. "Your father showed me today's medical schedule." The teenager looked up, a mix of defiance and curiosity in his eyes. "And impressive organization," she commented sincerely. "To manage to schedule 5 different appointments, coordinating times that seem coincident but aren't exactly simultaneous, it demonstrates exceptional planning skill." The boy's reaction was revealing, a brief expression of surprise followed by an attempt to hide his pride under a mask of indifference. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Michael," Eleanor entered the room, moving her chair closer to the bed. "I'm going to be direct with you, because I believe you deserve honesty. I know you're trying to make me give up, just like you did with the previous nannies. It's your way of protecting your siblings and perhaps getting your father's attention." The teenager's face hardened, but he didn't look away. "I'm not angry or disappointed," she continued. "In fact, I'm impressed with your loyalty and intelligence. But I need you to understand something important. I won't give up on your family, no matter how ingenious your tests are." "Everyone gives up eventually," Michael murmured, a glimpse of vulnerability escaping from behind his rebellious facade. "Not everyone," Eleanor replied softly. "I didn't give up on myself when doctors said I'd never walk again. I didn't give up when I lost my job because of my condition. I didn't give up when I had to relearn basic tasks most people do without thinking." Michael studied her silently, something changing in his gaze. "I need your help today," Eleanor declared, surprising him. "My help?" "Yes, I'm going to reorganize these appointments because, as you probably correctly calculated, it's logistically impossible to follow this schedule. But I'll keep some for today, starting with yours." "Why mine?" "Because you're the oldest, and because I need someone to help me with your siblings while I reorganize the other appointments." The surprise on Michael's face was genuine. "You're asking for my help? After I tried to sabotage your work? I'm asking for your help because you know your siblings better than anyone. You know how to calm them, how to communicate with the twins when they only use their code, how to make Leo stop crying, how to convince Beatrice to leave her room. You've been their caregiver for a long time, haven't you?" A heavy silence filled the room as Michael absorbed the words. His eyes momentarily glistened with contained tears, quickly disguised. Since she left," he finally confirmed, his voice almost a whisper. "Dad is always working." Eleanor nodded comprehendingly. "That must be exhausting. Someone needs to take care of them." "Yes, someone needs to. But Michael, that someone shouldn't just be you. You're also a child who deserves to be cared for." The boy swallowed hard, looking away. "What do you want me to do?" "First, accompany me to your appointment today. Then, help me explain to your sisters and brother why the other appointments will be rescheduled. And finally, consider the possibility that perhaps, just perhaps, we can be allies instead of adversaries." Michael remained silent for a long moment, evaluating the proposal. Finally, with an almost imperceptible sigh of surrender, he nodded. "Okay, but just for today." "Just for today," Eleanor agreed. "Shall we wake your siblings for breakfast?" The morning proceeded with a new dynamic. Michael, still reserved, but visibly less hostile, helped gather the children for breakfast. The twins immediately noticed the change in their brother's attitude and exchanged confused glances, their secret language faster and more restless than usual. "Calamar no shinda, Renafi?" Louisa asked, looking suspiciously from Michael to Eleanor. She didn't give up. "Yet," Michael replied in English, ignoring the code for the first time. "And we have doctor's appointments today." The twins' eyes widened, clearly surprised by their brother's betrayal of the plan. "Louisa and Laura, you two are very clever for creating such a complex language," Eleanor commented as she served breakfast. "Remember when I promised I'd like to learn some words? I'm still interested." The girls studied her with distrust. "We have school today," Laura finally said. "We can't miss it to go to the doctor." "That's why I reorganized the appointments," Eleanor explained. "Michael will go to the pediatrician today after school. You two will go tomorrow at the same time, so you can support each other. Leo on Wednesday and Beatrice on Thursday, all after school hours." "Our plan?" Louisa began, interrupting herself as she realized what she was admitting. It was very creative, Eleanor completed without judgment. But sometimes we need to adapt our plans when circumstances change. Breakfast proceeded in contemplative silence. After Michael and the twins left for school, Eleanor dedicated the morning to activities with Leo and Beatrice. To her surprise, little Beatrice approached more, sitting on the living room floor with her colored pencils. Not far from where Eleanor was helping Leo with adapted dyslexia exercises. "Beatrice, would you like to join us? We're creating stories with the dinosaurs," Eleanor invited softly. The girl didn't respond verbally, but shuffled a little closer, still clutching her drawing pad. Around noon, as they finished lunch, the house phone rang. Eleanor answered and recognized the voice of Henry's secretary. "Miss Finch? Mr. Montgomery asked me to check if everything is under control with the doctor's appointments. Please tell Mr. Montgomery that I've reorganized the schedule for this week, keeping only Michael's appointment for today. I have the situation under control." After hanging up, Eleanor noticed that Beatrice was observing her with unusual intensity. The girl then held out her drawing pad, an unprecedented gesture that made Eleanor hold her breath in surprise. On the page, a detailed drawing for a 4-year-old, a woman in a wheelchair holding the hands of 5 small figures. Below, in uncertain but legible letters, the words "Nanny Eleanor," the first verbal, albeit written, recognition of her presence in the girl's life. "It's beautiful." "Beatrice?" Eleanor commented, moved but maintaining her composure. "You draw very well. May I keep this drawing?" The girl nodded almost imperceptibly, a significant advance in communication. In the afternoon, as agreed, Eleanor took Michael to the pediatrician. The teenager remained silent during the accessible taxi ride, watching the city through the window. "Do you really believe you can be different from the others?" he finally asked, his voice mixing defiance and a reluctant hope. "I believe I can be exactly who I am, someone who understands that pain doesn't disappear when we ignore it," Eleanor replied, "and someone who doesn't give up easily." The appointment proceeded without incident. Dr. Paul, a middle-aged pediatrician with a comforting calm, commented on how much Michael had grown since his last visit. "You're almost as tall as your father now," the doctor observed. "And how are you doing in school?" "Well," Michael replied automatically, the kind of rehearsed answer adults expect to hear. "Michael has shown impressive organizational and leadership skills at home," Eleanor interjected, surprising both the doctor and the teenager. "He has a natural talent for taking care of his siblings." Michael's face flushed slightly, unaccustomed to genuine praise. As they left the office, a fine rain began to fall over Greenwich. They waited for the taxi under the awning when Michael finally spoke, his voice almost inaudible under the sound of the rain. "Do you really think I have a talent for taking care of them?" "I think you took on an enormous responsibility out of love for them," Eleanor replied honestly, "and you did the best you could with the emotional resources available." "That's admirable, Michael. But I also think you deserve the chance to just be a teenager sometimes." "I don't know how," he admitted, the vulnerability finally breaking through his carefully constructed facade. "We can find out together," Eleanor offered, "if you're willing to give it a chance." The taxi arrived, interrupting the moment. During the ride back, Michael remained thoughtful, occasionally casting evaluating glances at Eleanor, as if seeing her in a new light. Upon returning to the mansion, they found the twins already home, uncharacteristically silent. Eleanor immediately noticed that something had happened at school. "Is everything okay?" she asked as Michael went up to his room, casting a worried look at his sisters. "Bimanara Fedali," Louisa murmured, their code seemingly impenetrable. "Something happened at school that made them sad," Michael translated from the stairs, surprising everyone with his unexpected cooperation. Eleanor observed the girls carefully, noticing their slightly red eyes. "Do you want to talk about it?" The twins exchanged glances, and after a silent conversation, Laura finally spoke. "Anna Carroll had a birthday party and invited all the girls in the class except us." "Because we're strange," Louisa completed, the hurt evident in her voice. "She said no one can understand what we're saying and that it annoys everyone." Eleanor felt the weight of that exclusion, the casual cruelty of children who haven't yet developed full empathy. "I'm so sorry that happened," Exclusion hurts a lot, doesn't it? The twins nodded in perfect synchronicity. You know, when I was in rehabilitation after my accident, many of my friends stopped visiting me. I think they felt uncomfortable with my new condition, Eleanor shared. But I discovered something important. The people who truly matter are those who accept us exactly as we are. But no one accepts us, Laura said sadly. We only have each other. And now you have me too, Eleanor replied softly. Someone who finds your language fascinating. Not annoying. The girls studied her, looking for signs of falseness, but finding only sincerity. We can teach you some words, Louisa offered hesitantly. I'd love that, Eleanor smiled. Maybe we can start after dinner? That night marked a subtle shift in the house's dynamic. During dinner, Michael participated more actively in the conversation, responding when asked and occasionally correcting the exaggerated stories Leo told about his dinosaurs. The twins, still processing the school rejection, remained quieter than usual, but agreed to teach Eleanor some basic words of their language after the meal. In the living room, sitting in a circle on the rug, Eleanor had moved to the sofa, leaving her chair nearby. The twins took on the role of teachers with surprising seriousness. Bimanara means sad, Louisa explained, and Fidali means because of friends. Laura completed. So Bimanara Fidali means sad because of friends, Eleanor concluded, carefully pronouncing the foreign words. The girls nodded, a small smile of approval appearing on their faces. Where do these words come from? Eleanor asked with genuine curiosity. Did you invent them completely, or were you inspired by other languages? The twins exchanged glances again, a silent communication occurring between them. Some we invented, Louisa finally replied. Others are from languages Mom spoke, Laura added, her voice softening as she mentioned their mother. Eleanor absorbed the information carefully, recognizing the preciousness of what had just been shared. Your mother spoke several languages. 3, Michael replied, who had remained silently observing from the stairs. Portuguese, English, and French. She was a translator before she had us. What a wonderful gift to share with you, Eleanor commented, realizing the deep connection the twins had created with their mother's memory through language. The language session continued for another half hour, with Leo occasionally contributing his own fanciful interpretations of the words. Beatrice observed everything from the corner of the room, clutching a floral dress Eleanor hadn't seen before, clearly a piece that had belonged to Claire. When the clock struck 8:30, Eleanor announced it was time for the children to get ready for bed. To her surprise, there was less resistance than on previous nights. The twins went upstairs, talking in a mix of Portuguese and their secret code. Leo followed, clutching Rex, and Beatrice silently got up. Still holding the dress, Michael remained in the living room, ostensibly checking messages on his cell phone. But Eleanor noticed he was waiting to speak with her. Thank you, he finally said when they were alone, for what you said to the doctor today. I only told the truth, Eleanor replied. You've taken care of them the best you can. It's important that that's recognized. The teenager nodded, a silent thank you before going up to his own room. Henry arrived as Eleanor finished organizing the kitchen. He seemed exhausted from the trip, but there was a different tension in his shoulders, worry perhaps. How was the day? He asked, placing his briefcase on the kitchen island. Did you manage the appointments? I reorganized them for the week, Eleanor explained. Only Michael went today. Everything went well. The doctor was pleased with his development. Henry seemed momentarily lost, as if he didn't know how to process information about his children's well-being without an associated crisis. Mr. Montgomery, Eleanor began cautiously, may I ask you a personal question? He hesitated, clearly uncomfortable, but nodded. When was the last time you spent an entire afternoon with your children, without work or distractions? The question hung in the air like a silent accusation, though Eleanor's tone was only inquisitive. Henry began, then stopped, unable to recall. It's been difficult. The company demands a lot from me, especially after Claire. I understand, Eleanor gently interrupted, and the children understand too, in their own way. But they miss you, Mr. Montgomery. Michael has taken on much more responsibility than any teenager should. The twins created a parallel world through language to preserve their mother's memory. Leo likely has undiagnosed dyslexia, which explains his school difficulties. And Beatrice. What about Beatrice? he asked, suddenly more attentive. She communicates mainly through drawings. Today she showed me a family portrait, altogether including a figure in a wheelchair. I think she's starting to accept me. But I noticed she's carrying a floral dress I presume belonged to your wife. Henry closed his eyes briefly, pain crossing his face like a shadow. It was Claire's favorite. She wore it on Sundays. Mr. Montgomery, the children are trying to keep their mother's memory alive in their own way, but they need permission to talk about her, to process what happened. I don't know how to help them, he confessed, his voice breaking slightly. Every time I look at them, I see her eyes, her smile. It's unbearable. Pain doesn't disappear when we ignore it, Eleanor replied softly, repeating the words she had said to Michael. It just transforms into something harder to recognize. Your children are suffering, not because you failed them, but because all of you are trying to carry your grief in isolation. Henry loosened his tie, a gesture that seemed both physical and symbolic. What do you suggest? To start a family dinner on Sunday. No phones, no distractions. Just you talking, relearning to be a family. And will you be present? If you wish. But I believe that time should primarily be yours with your children. Henry seemed simultaneously terrified and slightly hopeful. I'll try, he finally promised. Sunday? When Eleanor left the mansion that night, she felt that something fundamental had begun to change. The first major test had been overcome, not through confrontation, but through unexpected collaboration. Michael, the reluctant guardian of his siblings, had momentarily lowered his guard. The twins had shared a precious secret about their private language. Leo had spent an entire day without crying fits. Beatrice had communicated directly through her drawings. And Henry. Henry had finally pronounced Claire's name without his voice completely failing. A small step, but significant, on the long road to healing. It was only the second day of the second week, and Eleanor knew there would be many other tests ahead. But for the first time since accepting the challenge, she envisioned the real possibility of healing for that family, torn apart by loss. The following 2 weeks passed with relative tranquility, punctuated by small daily progresses. The first major turning point came at the end of the first month, on a rainy Friday that forced everyone to stay indoors. Eleanor had suggested a movie session in the living room, transforming the formal space into a cozy environment with cushions, blankets, and a selection of animation classics. Michael, who had gradually assumed the role of a reluctant ally, helped prepare popcorn while the twins organized the seating. All ready for our movie night? Eleanor asked, entering the living room with a tray of sandwiches balanced on her lap. Almost, Louisa replied, strategically positioning the cushions. We made a special spot for Beatrice in the corner, so she wouldn't feel cornered. Eleanor smiled at the perceptive observation. The twins, who initially seemed absorbed in their own world, had been showing a growing awareness of their siblings' needs. Excellent idea, she approved. And where's Leo? Here, the boy replied, entering the room dragging a dinosaur green duvet almost bigger than himself. Rex wants to watch too. Naturally, Eleanor nodded seriously. Dinosaurs love animated movies. Progress with the children was visible. Leo, who in the first few weeks alternated between prolonged silences and crying fits, now communicated consistently, though still through the mediation of Rex. The twins had partially integrated Eleanor into their linguistic world, teaching her enough words to follow basic conversations. Michael oscillated between the rebellious teenager posture and that of a family protector, but his tests and traps had almost completely ceased. Beatrice remained the most reserved, but small gestures, a drawing strategically left for Eleanor to find, a sustained gaze for a few seconds longer, indicated growing trust. As they settled in for the movie, Henry unexpectedly appeared at the living room door. Something rare before nightfall on weekdays. "Daddy!" Leo exclaimed, his surprise echoing everyone else's. "Are you going to watch the movie with us?" Henry seemed out of place in his own home, still wearing his corporate suit, briefcase in hand. "I had a meeting cancelled," he explained, looking almost timidly at Eleanor as if seeking approval. "You arrived just in time," she replied naturally. "We were about to start. There's a perfect spot for you next to Beatrice." The little girl looked at her father with attentive eyes, her body tense with a combination of hope and apprehension. "Maybe I should change first?" Henry hesitated, Great idea, Eleanor agreed. We'll start when you get back. 15 minutes later, a transformed Henry returned to the living room, his suit and tie replaced by jeans and a faded blue sweater that clearly wasn't worn often. He looked younger, less rigid, and carried a tray with hot chocolate he had prepared himself in the kitchen, a small act that didn't go unnoticed by the children. As he settled next to Beatrice, the girl initially kept her distance, but as the movie progressed, Eleanor noticed how she gradually moved closer to her father, until eventually her small hand found his in the dark. The expression on Henry's face, a mix of surprise, relief, and deep pain, said it all. The chosen movie, Up, proved to be an emotionally charged choice no one had foreseen. As the scene of the protagonist couple's life unfolded, showing their journey of love, hope, and loss, a heavy silence fell over the room. Eleanor observed the reactions, the twins holding each other's hands tightly, Leo hugging Rex to his chest, Michael suddenly very interested in his popcorn, avoiding looking at the screen, and then the unexpected. A soft sound no one in the room had heard before. Beatrice was crying. Not dramatic sobs, just silent tears streaming down her face as she squeezed her father's hand. Henry seemed paralyzed, his own face reflecting a painful internal conflict. Finally, he did what he hadn't done in a long time. He knelt down and hugged his daughter, allowing his own tears to fall. It was as if an invisible dam had broken in the room. The twins approached, hesitant at first, then completely joining the embrace. Leo followed, dragging Rex with him. Only Michael remained distant, observing with an indecipherable expression. Eleanor remained quiet, recognizing the sacredness of the moment. That family was sharing their pain collectively for the first time since Claire's passing. After a few minutes, Henry cleared his throat, visibly uncomfortable with the vulnerability he had shown. "Maybe we should choose a happier movie," he suggested, trying to compose himself. "No," Beatrice said, her voice small but clearly audible, surprising everyone. "I want to see what happens to the old man." These were the first words most of them had heard from the youngest in months. Henry looked at her as if he had witnessed a miracle. "All right," he agreed softly. "Let's keep watching." The movie proceeded, but something fundamental had changed in the room. An old tension, almost imperceptible from being so familiar, had slightly dissipated. The children remained close to their father, a family constellation that was finally beginning to find its orbit again. When the credits rolled, Henry surprised everyone again. "I think we should do this more often," he declared. "Family movie nights, maybe every Friday?" The silence that followed was one of assimilation, not rejection. The children exchanged glances, processing this new possibility. A present father, a restored family routine. "Can we take turns choosing the movies?" Michael finally asked, his first voluntary contribution to the family moment. "Of course," Henry replied with a hesitant smile. "Next week can be your choice." Later, after the children had gone to bed, Henry found Eleanor in the kitchen, organizing the mess left by the movie night. "You planned this," he stated, not as an accusation, but with a new awareness. "The movie, the moment. I planned a family movie night," she replied honestly. "The rest happened naturally because it needed to happen." Henry sat heavily on one of the tall stools at the kitchen island. Beatrice spoke. "She hadn't said a complete word since she lost her mother," Eleanor completed gently. "Mr. Montgomery, it's important to be able to say those words. Naming the loss is the first step to processing it." "Henry," he corrected softly. "I think after today you've earned the right to call me by my first name." Eleanor smiled, accepting the small but significant change. "Henry, then. Your children are trying to find a way through their pain, but they need guidance. They need to know it's safe to feel, safe to remember." "I don't know how to do that," he admitted, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "Every time I think of Claire, it's like the world collapses again." "It is," Eleanor confirmed. "But avoiding pain doesn't make it disappear. It just transfers it to those around you, your children in this case." Henry absorbed the words in silence, his gaze lost in some distant point. "There's a room," he finally said, "on the 3rd floor. It was Claire's studio where she translated her books. After she left, I locked everything exactly as it was on her last day." "No one is allowed in, not even the children." "Especially the children," he confirmed. "I thought it would be easier for them to move on if they didn't dwell on memories." But that's not how grief works, especially for children, Eleanor explained. They need tangible connections, a place to direct their feelings. By denying access to their mother's physical memories, you inadvertently intensified the sense of loss. Henry seemed genuinely disturbed by this perspective. I just wanted to protect them. I know, Eleanor assured. Your intentions were the best. But perhaps it's time to rethink that approach. A contemplative silence filled the kitchen. Finally, Henry spoke, his voice low but resolute. Tomorrow. I'll open the room tomorrow. Would you be present to help the children? Of course, Eleanor agreed. I'll be here. The next morning, an exceptionally sunny Saturday after days of rain, Eleanor arrived at the mansion earlier than usual. She found Henry already awake, sitting alone on the veranda with an untouched cup of coffee, his gaze fixed on the hills surrounding Greenwich. Good morning, she greeted softly, not wanting to startle him. Henry turned, his face marked by what seemed to have been a sleepless night. Good morning. The children are still sleeping. Understandable after last night's emotional evening, Eleanor commented, positioning her chair beside him on the veranda. How are you feeling? Honestly? Terrified, he admitted with a humorless laugh. I haven't been in that room for 2 years. It's an important step, she acknowledged. Not just for the children, but for you too. What if I can't do it? The vulnerability in his voice was palpable, a man accustomed to control facing the uncontrollable. You're not alone in this, Eleanor reminded him. And remember, it's not about getting over Claire's loss. It's about learning to carry that absence in a way that allows you all to continue living fully. Gradually, the house began to wake up. Michael was the first to appear, followed by the twins, then Leo dragging his inseparable Rex. Beatrice was the last, still clutching the floral dress she rarely let go of. Breakfast proceeded in an expectant silence. Henry had mentioned the night before that he had something important to share with everyone, and the tension was palpable. Finally, when the dishes were cleared, Henry cleared his throat nervously. Children, I've made a decision. He paused, searching for the right words. Today we're going to open Mom's studio. The reaction was immediate. Michael dropped the glass he was holding, spilling juice on the table. The twins froze in a shared glance, their hands tightly intertwined. Leo clutched Rex to his chest, his eyes wide with a mix of fear and anticipation. Beatrice, surprisingly, was the only one who seemed unsurprised, as if she had been waiting for this moment for a long time. Why now? Michael questioned, his voice oscillating between accusation and contained hope. Because, Henry hesitated, looking at Eleanor, who nodded encouragingly. Because I realize I made a mistake, trying to protect you from your mother's memories. Perhaps we need them to move forward. The walk to the 3rd floor was silent and solemn. Henry led, holding a bunch of keys that jingled softly with each step, betraying his nervous tremor. The children followed in descending order of age, Michael reluctantly curious, the twins occasionally whispering in their code, Leo cautious, and Beatrice surprisingly determined. Eleanor came last, using the elevator installed for her accessibility. When everyone gathered in the 3rd floor hallway, before a dark wooden door at the end of the hall, Henry hesitated, the key suspended in the air. Mom used to say this was her magic place, he murmured almost to himself, where words traveled between worlds. With a deliberately slow movement, he unlocked the door and pushed it open, revealing a room bathed in the golden light of the morning sun, streaming through wide windows overlooking the garden. Claire Montgomery's studio was exactly as she had left it. A light wooden desk covered with books, dictionaries, and notebooks. Shelves filled with works in various languages. A red armchair in the corner, with a blue shawl casually draped over the backrest. A corkboard on the wall covered with photos, cards, and reminders. An Italian coffee machine on a sideboard, a cup still half full. The children remained at the entrance, as if the threshold of that space was a sacred boundary they feared to violate. Come in, Henry invited softly. This place belongs to you as much as it belonged to her. Michael was the first to take a hesitant step, immediately followed by the twins, who moved in perfect synchronicity. Leo held Eleanor's hand, seeking security before entering. Beatrice, surprisingly, ran directly to the red armchair, hugging the blue shawl to her face and inhaling deeply, as if trying to capture an almost forgotten scent. The moment that followed was one of silent rediscovery. Each child naturally gravitated towards elements that reflected their particular connection to their mother. Michael examined the bookshelf, his fingers reverently gliding over the spines. The twins were drawn to the linguistic notebooks, flipping through pages covered in Claire's elegant handwriting. Leo found a small crystal dinosaur used as a paperweight, holding it as if it were the most precious of treasures. Henry remained at the door, his face a mask of conflicting emotions, pain, nostalgia, regret, and something else, perhaps the hesitant beginning of acceptance. "Daddy," Louisa called softly, holding up a notebook. "We found something." Henry approached, visibly tense. The twins showed a page where Claire had noted phrases in various languages, with translations alongside. At the top of the page, a simple title, "Phrases for My Daughters to Learn." "That's how we started our code," Laura explained, her voice choked. "Mom used to teach us words in French and English." "And you continued," Henry understood, a revelation illuminating his face. "You kept her tradition alive." The twins nodded in unison, silent tears streaming down their faces. "Michael," Henry called, noticing that his son had found something. "What do you have there?" The teenager was holding a guitar that had been discreetly leaning in a corner. "I didn't know Mom played," he said, running his fingers over the dusty strings. "She was learning," Henry explained, the memory clearly painful. "She started 6 months before the accident. She wanted to surprise Leo on his birthday, play the dinosaur song he loved so much." Michael hugged the instrument to his chest, as if that object contained a part of his mother he could preserve. "Look what I found, Rex," Leo exclaimed, discovering a box with miniature wooden animal carvings. "Mom collected dinosaurs too." The exploration continued, each discovery bringing forth memories, tears, and surprisingly smiles. Stories began to emerge spontaneously. "Remember when Mom tried to make that birthday cake that collapsed? And when she took us camping in the garden because it was too rainy to go to the mountains?" Eleanor observed everything from the doorway, respecting the family's space but present if needed. She noticed how Beatrice, still clutching the shawl, had settled into the red armchair, her eyes scanning every inch of the room, absorbing, memorizing. It was Beatrice who eventually made the most significant discovery. Moving from the armchair to the desk, she opened a side drawer and found a small photo album. Silently, she took it to her father. Henry received the album with trembling hands. As he opened it, his face paled. The children approached, curious, and Eleanor saw it was a pregnancy diary documenting the wait for Beatrice. "She created one for each of you," Henry explained, his voice almost inaudible. It was her way of documenting each journey. The pages revealed a radiant Claire, caressing her growing belly, preparing the baby's room, celebrating with the other children the arrival of the youngest. The last entry, dated just 1 week before the accident, contained a letter addressed to her unborn daughter. "Dearest Beatrice," Henry read, struggling to maintain composure. "Today you kicked so hard that your father felt it for the first time. I said you'll be a dancer, but I think you'll be an explorer, someone who seeks her own path with courage and determination. I can't wait to discover who you choose to be. Know, my little one, that whatever path you choose, you will never walk alone. We will always be by your side, applauding every step." A dense silence filled the room. Beatrice, who had listened attentively, looked at her father with an expression that combined understanding and questioning. "Mommy is always with me?" she asked, her voice small but clear. Henry swallowed hard, unable to answer immediately. It was Michael who knelt beside his youngest sister. "Yes, Bea," he replied, using the familiar nickname for the first time in 2 years. "Mommy is always with all of us." "Right here," he pointed to his sister's heart. "And here," he indicated the books, the shawl, the room around them. "And especially here," he concluded, encircling the small family in a hug with his arms, including his father. Henry finally broke down, deep sobs shaking his shoulders as he embraced his children. The twins joined the hug, followed by Leo, who dragged Rex with him. Beatrice, in the center of the family circle, clutched her mother's shawl with one hand and the floral dress with the other, past and present united in a single moment of reconnection. Eleanor watched from the door, silent tears streaming down her face. That scene represented exactly what she hoped to facilitate from the first day. Not the forgetting of loss, but its incorporation into the family's new reality. Eventually, the intense moment gave way to a different calm. The children began to select small objects they would like to take with them, personal treasures that would create bridges between the sanctuary of memory and their daily lives. Michael chose the guitar, the twins the linguistic notebooks, Leo the crystal dinosaur, Beatrice the blue shawl she hadn't let go of since entering the room. Before they left, Henry made a surprising announcement. "This room will no longer be locked. You can come here whenever you feel the need to be close to Mom." On the way back downstairs, Beatrice surprisingly held Eleanor's hand, a small gesture that communicated more than words. The rest of the day passed in a different atmosphere, melancholic, yes, but also strangely relieved, as if an invisible weight had been partially lifted from everyone's shoulders. The children shared stories about their mother spontaneously, something that hadn't happened in a long time. Henry, though visibly exhausted by the emotional intensity, seemed more present than at any time since Eleanor had met him. "Thank you," he said that night, when the children had finally fallen asleep, many of them with their new treasures from the studio carefully positioned beside their beds. "You were right. They needed this. I needed this." "You took an important step today," Eleanor replied. "Transforming an untouchable sanctuary into a living space of memories allows everyone to move forward without feeling they are abandoning Claire." Henry nodded, absorbing the wisdom of those words. "How did you become so wise about grief?" he asked, genuinely curious. Eleanor smiled softly. "When I lost the ability to walk, I had to grieve for the person I was, for the dreams I had, for the life I imagined. I learned that the only way to move forward was to incorporate that loss into my new identity, not to pretend it didn't exist." "And you succeeded," he observed, looking at her with new respect. "I succeeded," she confirmed. "And you will too, in your own time and in your own way." That night, returning to her small apartment, Eleanor reflected on the significant progress she had witnessed. The journey was far from over, and there would inevitably be setbacks and obstacles ahead. But for the first time, the Montgomery family had collectively confronted the ghost that hung over their lives. The room was not just a repository of Claire's memories, it was a symbol of what they had lost and, more importantly, of what they could regain. The ability to remember with love instead of paralyzing pain, to honor the past without being trapped by it, to rebuild a family that was different, but still complete in its own way. As she prepared for bed, Eleanor smiled, remembering the image of Beatrice hugging her mother's shawl, finally able to connect with the absent presence she had so longed for. That little girl, who carried the floral dress like a talisman, had found a new way to preserve her connection with her mother, not through silence, but through tangible memory. Michael's words echoed in her mind, "Mommy is always with all of us." Perhaps that was the most important lesson of all, that those we love never truly leave us. As long as we have the courage to keep their memories alive, not as untouchable sanctuaries, but as active presences in our constantly evolving lives. The opening of Claire's studio marked a turning point for the Montgomery family. Over the following weeks, transformations became visible not only in family interactions, but also in the physical environment of the mansion. What was once an impeccably decorated yet cold and impersonal space began to show signs of a truly inhabited home. On a particularly sunny Sunday afternoon, about 5 weeks after Eleanor's arrival, Henry surprised everyone with an unexpected proposal. "What would you all think about redecorating your rooms?" he asked during lunch, prompting surprised looks around the table. "We could choose new colors, furniture, whatever you want." The children exchanged confused glances, as if suspecting a trap. "Any color?" Leo asked, his crystal dinosaur, now an inseparable companion along with Rex, reflecting the sunlight on the table. "Any color," Henry confirmed. "Within reason, of course." "No, all black, Michael." The teenager, who had been timidly practicing his mother's guitar in recent days, raised an eyebrow. "What if I want to turn my room into a music studio?" Henry hesitated briefly, clearly fighting his instinct for control. "We can discuss acoustics and the neighbors, but in principle, yes." The twins immediately began conversing in their code, now occasionally interspersed with English when they wanted to include others in the conversation. We could have maps on the walls, Louisa suggested, her eyes gleaming with the possibility. Of all the places in our words, Laura completed, referring to the countries whose languages they had incorporated into their secret code. Beatrice, who in recent days had started speaking more, short, still hesitant sentences, but definitely more communicative, looked at her father with her large, attentive eyes turned yellow, she declared simply, like Mommy's Sunday dress. The momentary silence that followed was different from the tense silences that once dominated the house. It was contemplative, laden with memory without being overwhelming. Yellow it will be, Henry agreed, his voice slightly choked. And you, Leo? Dinosaur green, the boy promptly replied, making everyone smile at the predictability of the choice. Eleanor observed the interaction with discreet satisfaction. This was precisely the kind of initiative she had suggested to Henry, physical transformations that would symbolize and facilitate the ongoing emotional transformations. In the following days, the mansion transformed into a construction site. Henry, surprisingly, took 3 days off work to personally supervise the changes, something unprecedented since Claire's passing. The children immersed themselves in the project with enthusiasm, researching ideas, creating inspiration boards, discussing possibilities. Michael drew detailed plans for his studio, including a prominent space for his mother's guitar. The twins created a mural where they intended to mark all the countries whose languages they would study in the future, starting with the 3 their mother mastered. Leo insisted on an entire wall dedicated to a dinosaur timeline, combining his passion with an educational opportunity. Beatrice, though less verbal in her preferences, spent hours choosing between different shades of yellow, holding samples against the floral dress she still carried with her, seeking the perfect match. For Eleanor, those transformations represented much more than aesthetic changes. They were declarations of intent, affirmations of identity, concrete steps towards healing. "You've transformed this house," Henry commented one evening, as they watched the children animatedly discussing decor in the living room. "It doesn't even feel like the same place from 2 months ago." "It wasn't me," Eleanor gently corrected. "It was all of you. I just helped open some doors." On Thursday of that week, as the painters worked in the second-floor bedrooms, forcing the children to temporarily settle in other rooms, an unexpected incident occurred, the first major test of the new family dynamic. Eleanor was in the kitchen, preparing a snack with Leo's help, when she felt a sharp pang in her lower back. The pain, a familiar ghost of her condition, usually controlled with medication and specific exercises, suddenly surged with an intensity she hadn't experienced in months. "Are you okay, Aunt Eleanor?" Leo asked, noticing her tense expression. "Just a nasty ache," she replied, trying to smile while discreetly reaching for her bag in search of the painkillers she always carried. To her dismay, the bottle was empty. She had forgotten to refill it. In the following minutes, the pain intensified to the point where Eleanor had to stop what she was doing, positioning her chair against the wall and closing her eyes, concentrating on breathing techniques as she tried to control the muscle spasms. "Michael," Leo called, running to the living room where his older brother was studying. "Aunt Eleanor isn't feeling well." Michael immediately appeared in the kitchen, assessing the situation with the forced maturity of someone who had taken on responsibilities prematurely. "What's happening?" he asked, kneeling beside Eleanor's chair. "Chronic pain flare-up," she explained between controlled breaths. "It happens occasionally. I usually take medication, but I ran out. It'll pass, I just need some time." Michael watched her attentively, evaluating the situation. "Leo, go call the twins, quickly!" In minutes, everyone was gathered in the kitchen, including Beatrice, who observed everything with wide eyes. "What can we do?" Louisa asked, surprisingly objective. "I need to lie down for a bit," Eleanor admitted, hating to show vulnerability, but recognizing the necessity. "And applying local heat would help. I have a heating pad in my bag." Without hesitation, the children organized themselves like a small emergency team. Michael took charge, directing the twins to prepare the living room sofa with pillows. Leo was sent to heat water for tea, something he had learned from Eleanor weeks earlier. Beatrice silently opened Eleanor's bag and found the heating pad. "I can help you get to the sofa," Michael offered, positioning himself beside the chair. Eleanor hesitated, her greatest fear materializing, the moment her physical condition would prevent her from adequately caring for the children under her responsibility. "I can move by myself," she insisted, although each movement amplified the pain. "I know you can," Michael replied with surprising maturity. "But you don't have to. Just like you taught us that asking for help isn't weakness." Those words, echoing her own lessons, completely disarmed Eleanor. She nodded, allowing Michael and the twins to help her transfer from the chair to the sofa. The following minutes revealed an extraordinary turnaround. The same children who had meticulously planned to drive away nannies now organized themselves with impressive precision to care for Eleanor. The twins brought extra pillows, positioning them strategically to offer lumbar support. Leo returned with a perfectly prepared cup of chamomile tea. Michael located a light blanket in the hallway closet, and Beatrice, to everyone's surprise, simply sat on the floor beside the sofa, silently holding Eleanor's hand, offering the same quiet comfort she had received so many times. "Are we doing it right?" Leo asked, genuine concern in his eyes as he held Rex protectively to his chest. "Perfectly right," Eleanor assured, touched beyond words by the care shown. "You are amazing." "We learned from you," Michael simply replied, adjusting the heating pad. When Henry returned from the office hours later, he found a scene he never would have imagined. Eleanor asleep on the sofa, the children around her in a protective vigil. Beatrice still holding her hand, the twins quietly reading in nearby armchairs, Leo drawing dinosaurs sitting on the rug, and Michael, surprisingly, softly playing the guitar in a corner, his first hesitant notes in a melody that vaguely resembled a lullaby. "What happened?" he asked in a low voice, concern evident on his face. "Aunt Eleanor had a pain flare-up," Leo explained in exaggerated whispers. "We're taking care of her like she takes care of us." The simplicity of that explanation perfectly captured the transformation that had occurred. Eleanor, who had entered that house to care for traumatized children, was now receiving the same care in return, completing a circle of emotional reciprocity that was perhaps the greatest progress of all. That night marked another turning point. When Eleanor awoke, she found not only the children, but also Henry standing guard. He had cancelled a night meeting, unthinkable weeks before, to ensure she received the necessary care. "I called your doctor," he informed her when he saw her wake up. "I sent for your medication at the pharmacy, and I insist you spend the night here in the guest room. It's not safe to go back to your apartment alone in this condition." The genuine concern in his voice surprised Eleanor. Even more so the absence of professional judgment. There was no questioning of her ability to continue the work, only human concern for her well-being. "I can call the accessible taxi," she weakly protested, knowing it would be futile. "Don't be stubborn," Michael interjected, an evident irony in his tone, as he used the exact phrase Eleanor frequently directed at him. "We've already prepared the room." The twins confirmed in unison. Leo nodded vigorously, and Beatrice squeezed her hand as a final argument. "It seems I'm outnumbered," Eleanor surrendered with a smile. That was the first night she spent in the Montgomery mansion, but it represented much more than an emergency stay. It was a silent declaration that she was no longer just an employee. She was someone who belonged, in some way, to that newly reformed family circle. The next morning, when the pain had subsided considerably, thanks to the medication and rest, Eleanor found a drawing carefully placed on the bedside table. Beatrice's work showed 6 figures holding hands, 5 small and 1 in a wheelchair, surrounded by dinosaurs, maps, guitars, and yellow splotches that clearly represented the new rooms. At the top, in childish but determined letters, "Our family now." As the days passed and the rooms were finally ready, the Montgomery mansion truly transformed. Michael's room, now a small studio with basic acoustic treatment, housed not only his mother's guitar, but also a keyboard that Henry surprisingly bought after discovering his son's growing interest in music. The twins' room became a living atlas, with walls covered with maps, flags, and writing systems from different countries. A special shelf was installed to house Claire's linguistic notebooks, now accompanied by new diaries where the girls developed their own language, no longer as a secret refuge, but as a creative project shared with the family. Leo's room, a dinosaur green paradise, now included a shelf specially adapted for his growing collection, including the precious crystal dinosaur from his mother's studio. More importantly, a small study desk was equipped with specific materials for dyslexia, following the recommendations of the specialist who had finally evaluated him, confirming Eleanor's diagnosis. Beatrice's room, bathed in different shades of yellow, housed a small exhibition of her mother's favorite dresses, now preserved on a child's clothing rack, where the girl could see and touch them whenever she wanted, without the need to constantly carry them as protective talismans. Each space reflected not only individual personalities, but also reconstructed connections with Claire's memory, no longer a painful ghost kept at a distance, but a loving presence integrated into the new chapter they were writing. On a particularly significant afternoon, while supervising the final organization of the rooms, Eleanor found Henry standing in the hallway, observing the open doors with a complex expression. "It looks like a different house," he commented. "It looks like a living house," Eleanor gently corrected. "That's what was missing, Henry, life." He nodded slowly, absorbing the observation. "Claire would love this," he finally said, his voice steady as he pronounced his wife's name. "She always wanted each room to reflect who our children were, not just what matched the overall decor. And now it reflects who they are becoming," Eleanor added. "That's the most beautiful part. They're not just stuck in the past or fearful of the future. They are present, evolving." That night, the family gathered for a special dinner, celebrating the completion of the new rooms. For the first time since Eleanor's arrival, Henry cooked, a pasta dish that, according to the children, was Claire's specialty on Sundays. "It won't be like hers," he warned, nervous as he served the plates. "I never quite got the sauce right." "It doesn't have to be the same," Michael replied, surprising everyone. "It can be different and still be good." That simple sentence perfectly captured the family's journey over the past 2 months, learning that different didn't necessarily mean worse, that new configurations could coexist with precious memories, that honoring the past didn't require sacrificing the present. After dinner, while the children proudly showed their new spaces to Eleanor, though she had already participated in every stage of the transformation, Henry discreetly called her to the office. "I have a proposal for you," he said, seeming simultaneously determined and nervous. "Your initial contract was for 3 months, and we're already at the end of the second." Eleanor nodded, feeling a pang of apprehension. Despite the evident progress, there was still much work to be done, many layers of healing to be explored. "I'd like to offer not just a renewal, but a change in terms," Henry continued. "The children, we would like you to consider a permanent position." Eleanor didn't hide her surprise. "Permanent?" "Yes, with accommodations here in the mansion, if you prefer. There's a set of rooms on the ground floor that could be adapted to ensure your independence and privacy." He paused, organizing his thoughts. "I'm also negotiating a reduction in my work hours. I've realized I've been using the office as an escape, and that needs to change, but I'll still need to travel occasionally, and knowing you would be here." "It's a generous proposal," Eleanor replied carefully. "And honestly, I feel deeply connected to this family, but I need to think about it calmly. Permanent decisions require careful consideration." Henry nodded, respecting her caution. "Naturally, just consider it. The children have never been so balanced since we lost Claire. And it's not just the professional work you do with them. It's your presence, your example." That night in her temporary apartment, Eleanor reflected at length on the proposal. Professionally, it represented stability and purpose, exactly what she sought when she accepted the initial challenge. Personally, it meant integrating into a rebuilding family, with all the emotional complexities that implied. There was also the question of Henry. In recent days, Eleanor had noticed subtle changes in the way he looked at her, as if he gradually saw her not just as the nanny who saved his children, but as a complete woman, with her own strengths and vulnerabilities. It was a dynamic that would need to be carefully navigated, considering the delicate context. The next morning, upon returning to the mansion, Eleanor was greeted by a surprising scene. In the backyard garden under Michael's supervision, the children were planting a small yellow trumpet tree. "What are you doing?" she asked, approaching along the accessible path. "Planting a tree for Mommy," Leo explained enthusiastically. Daddy said that when special people leave, we plant trees so they can continue to grow in another way. Henry approached, a shovel in his hands and dirt on the knees of his normally immaculate pants. It's an old tradition in my family, he explained. I never had the courage to do it before. It felt like too definitive an acceptance, but now I realize it's exactly the opposite. It's a continuation. Eleanor watched the small family ceremony with contained emotion. Each child added a little dirt, sharing a favorite memory of their mother as they did so. Michael remembered the elaborate stories Claire invented before bedtime. The twins recalled the language lessons disguised as games. Leo mentioned how she always pretended to be scared of his toy dinosaurs. Beatrice, though having few direct memories due to her age when she lost her mother, shared something she had heard from her siblings, how Claire sang to her while still in her belly. Henry finally knelt beside the small tree. Claire loved yellow trumpet trees, he explained with a choked voice. She used to say they were like fireworks frozen in time, exploding in slow motion. This tree will grow with you, marking new memories while honoring the old ones. In that moment, observing the family united around the newly planted tree, a living symbol of renewal and continuity, Eleanor felt the answer to Henry's proposal crystallize in her heart. Regardless of the specific terms, her commitment to that family had already become something much greater than a professional contract. The Montgomery mansion, which 2 months earlier seemed like an elegant mausoleum preserving Claire's painful absence, was gradually transforming into a home where memory coexisted with the present, where grief gave way to celebration, where each newly painted room represented not just an aesthetic change, but a declaration of intent. This family chose to live fully again. As Eleanor's 3rd month at the Montgomery mansion neared its end, new challenges emerged. The most significant of them arrived on a Sunday morning, in the form of an unexpected visit. Eleanor was in the kitchen with the children, preparing a special pancake breakfast, a Sunday tradition she had established in recent weeks. Michael, demonstrating a newfound talent for cooking, supervised the batter mixing. The twins cut fruit with synchronized precision. Leo meticulously set the table, ensuring Rex had his own place. Beatrice, increasingly communicative, separated the ingredients for the chocolate syrup, occasionally sampling a piece of chocolate when she thought no one was looking. The sound of the doorbell interrupted the domestic harmony. "Strange," Michael commented, checking the wall clock. "We're not expecting anyone, and it's too early for visitors." Henry, who was flipping through the Sunday newspaper in the living room, another recently resumed habit, went to answer the door. Moments later, altered voices reached the kitchen, one of them female and laden with indignation. "How could you? Not even consult me? She was my sister, Henry." The children froze, exchanging alarmed glances. The voice was familiar, but rarely heard in the last 2 years. "Aunt Helen," Louisa whispered to Eleanor. Explaining what needed no explanation, the tone and content had already revealed the visitor's identity. Helen Sterling, Claire's older sister, had been a constant presence in the first few months after the accident. According to fragments Eleanor had gathered from the children's conversations, she initially offered support, but gradually withdrew when her suggestions on how Henry should raise the children were systematically ignored. "Children, continue with the pancakes," Eleanor instructed calmly, though she sensed the growing tension. "I'll see if I can help your father." She went to the living room, where she found Henry standing, visibly uncomfortable, before a middle-aged woman whose features vaguely resembled Claire's in the photographs Eleanor knew. The same expressive eyes, the same face shape, but with a hardness that Claire's smiling images never revealed. Helen interrupted her accusation upon noticing Eleanor's approach. Her gaze quickly scanned the wheelchair, an expression of shock and then disbelief taking over her face. "Is this the famous nanny who's working miracles?" she asked, her tone oscillating between disdain and genuine surprise. A woman in a wheelchair caring for 5 children, including a 4-year-old. "Is this your idea of parental responsibility, Henry?" Eleanor maintained her composure, accustomed to similar reactions throughout her life. Before she could properly introduce herself, Henry intervened, his voice tense but controlled. "Helen, this is Eleanor Finch, a specialized educator who has been doing extraordinary work with the children." Eleanor Helen Sterling, Claire's sister. Pleased to meet you. Ms. Sterling, Eleanor greeted politely, extending her hand. Helen ignored the gesture, turning back to Henry. First, you practically buried yourself in work, neglecting your own children. Now you hire a person with special needs to care for them. What are you thinking? I'm thinking that for the first time in 2 years, my children are truly processing their grief, Henry replied, an unusual firmness in his voice. I'm thinking that we've finally found someone who helps them connect with their mother's memory in a healthy way, instead of repressing it. Miss Sterling, Eleanor interjected. Softly, I understand your concern. It's natural to want to protect your nieces and nephews. But I assure you that my physical condition does not interfere with the quality of care I provide. In fact, in many ways, it has made me more equipped to help them process losses and adaptations. Helen turned to Eleanor, her critical eyes fully assessing her. I heard rumors around town that you're doing some kind of unconventional therapy with the children, that you're unearthing painful memories, that they now have access to Claire's studio. The mention of the studio, pronounced as an accusation, revealed the true core of Helen's concern. That sanctuary had emotional significance not only for Claire's immediate family but also for her sister. It was a joint decision, Henry explained, his tone softening slightly. The children needed that connection, Helen. Keeping the room locked was only prolonging the pain. It wasn't your unilateral decision, Helen exclaimed, raw emotion in her voice. That space holds her memories that belong to our family too. Objects from our mother, memories from our childhood. The final piece of the puzzle clicked for Eleanor. This wasn't just a worried aunt questioning educational methods. It was a sister, still in her own grieving process, feeling excluded from decisions about her lost sister's legacy. Miss Sterling, Eleanor began again, her tone deliberately calm, perhaps you'd like to have a cup of coffee. The children are in the kitchen preparing Sunday breakfast. They'd be happy to see their aunt. The mention of the children seemed to momentarily disorient Helen, as if she had forgotten that the true heart of the matter wasn't the adults and their differences, but the 5 children who had lost their mother. Their cooking, she asked, momentarily distracted from her indignation. Michael discovered a talent for cooking, Henry confirmed, grasping the change of subject like a lifeline. And the twins are speaking more English than their secret code. Leo was diagnosed with dyslexia and is receiving appropriate support. Beatrice has started speaking again. Each achievement mentioned clearly impacted Helen, whose expression alternated between skepticism and reluctant curiosity. You're telling me that in less than 3 months, a single person accomplished what 17 professionals couldn't before? The distrust in her voice was evident. It wasn't a single person, Eleanor gently corrected. It was a joint effort. The children did the hardest emotional work. Henry took courageous steps to reconnect with his family. I merely offered some tools and perspectives. At that moment, Beatrice shyly appeared at the living room door, her child's apron stained with chocolate. Aunt Helen, she called hesitantly, her large eyes observing the scene cautiously. Helen turned, her face softening immediately at the sight of her niece. Beatrice, how you've grown! To everyone's surprise, the girl crossed the room and hugged her aunt, a level of physical contact that a few months ago would have been unthinkable with anyone beyond her immediate siblings. We're making pancakes with chocolate syrup, Beatrice informed her. Do you want some? The innocent invitation, coming from the child who previously could barely articulate words, completely disarmed Helen. Her eyes welled up, and for a moment, the mask of indignation fell, revealing only a woman dealing with her own pain. I'd love some, dear, she replied, her voice suddenly fragile. The breakfast that followed was a study in complex family dynamics. The children, initially cautious with their aunt's unexpected presence, gradually relaxed as they realized she was genuinely interested in their progress. Michael proudly explained how he had perfected the pancake recipe after 3 frustrated attempts. The twins demonstrated some words from their code, now understood as a tribute to their polyglot mother, rather than a communication barrier. Leo showed his dinosaurs, including the precious crystal from the studio. Beatrice remained close to Helen throughout the meal, occasionally offering pieces of fruit directly from her plate, a gesture of connection that went unnoticed by no one. Eleanor observed silently, intervening only when necessary to facilitate conversation or clarify some aspect of the work she had been doing with the family. She noticed how Helen's face gradually transformed, the initial skepticism giving way to a reluctant understanding that, indeed, positive changes were occurring in that house. After breakfast, when the children dispersed for their Sunday activities, Michael to practice guitar, the twins to a map project in their room, Leo to an adapted reading session, and Beatrice to her drawing nook, Helen finally turned her attention directly to Eleanor. "May I speak with you privately?" she requested, her tone significantly more respectful than earlier that morning. Eleanor nodded, and together they went to the side veranda, a quiet space overlooking the garden where the newly planted yellow trumpet tree stood out against the green. "When I heard from mutual friends that Henry had hired a special nanny, I imagined some kind of charlatan taking advantage of the situation," Helen began bluntly. "I heard your salary is significantly above market rate." "I understand your concern," Eleanor replied serenely. "When families are vulnerable, unfortunately there are people willing to exploit that vulnerability." "But you're not one of those people," Helen concluded, not as a question but as a reluctant realization. "I hope not," Eleanor smiled. "My goal has always been to help these children find tools to process a loss that, frankly, is incomprehensible even for adults. And perhaps in the process, help Henry reconnect with his family." Helen observed the garden thoughtfully, her eyes lingering on the small tree. "They planted a trumpet tree for Claire," she observed, emotion contained in her voice. "It was the children's idea, actually," Eleanor explained. "After opening the studio, they wanted a living symbol of their mother's continued presence in their lives." The studio. Helen sighed deeply. That was her sanctuary. The place where we were just Claire and Helen again, like when we were children, talking about books and dreams. Henry never understood how much that space meant to both of us, not just to her. The final piece of the puzzle clicked for Eleanor. "You're not just worried about your nieces and nephews. You're worried about your own connection to Claire's memory." Helen didn't respond immediately, her eyes fixed on the small yellow tree. "She was my only sister," she finally said. "My best friend. When she left, I lost more than a sister. I lost part of my history, my identity. And now you feel you're losing access to her physical memories," Eleanor gently completed. "That by opening the studio to the children, somehow your special space with Claire was diluted." A solitary tear ran down Helen's face, quickly wiped away. "It's ridiculous, isn't it? A woman my age feeling jealous of how children process grief for their own mother. It's not ridiculous," Eleanor firmly countered. "It's deeply human. Grief has no timetable and follows no rules of etiquette. You are also working through your own loss." A contemplative silence settled between the two women, broken only by the distant sound of Michael's guitar practicing on the second floor. "You know," Eleanor continued after some time, "I'm sure the children would love to hear stories about their mother when she was young, stories only her sister could tell." Helen looked at Eleanor, surprised by the suggestion. "Do you think so?" "I'm sure. They're hungry for connections with Claire, especially Beatrice, who has fewer direct memories. And Henry, while he's made admirable progress, can only share the Claire he knew as an adult, as a wife. You're the only one who can offer the child Claire, the teenage Claire, the sister Claire." The idea clearly resonated with Helen, whose face gradually brightened with possibilities. "I have photo albums from our childhood, letters we exchanged when she studied abroad, small gifts she gave me over the years. Treasures the children would love to know about," Eleanor confirmed. "Not as untouchable relics of a closed sanctuary, but as living bridges to the mother they lost." Helen wiped away another tear, this time without trying to hide the emotion. "You're very different from what I imagine," she admitted. "People usually are," Eleanor smiled, "especially when we meet them through prejudices or rumors." When they returned to the house, they found Henry in the living room, organizing family photo albums, an activity that would have been unthinkable months before, when any visual memory of Claire was carefully avoided. "Helen," he called, noticing her entrance. "I was thinking, perhaps you'd like to contribute to this collection. We're creating a chronological album of Claire's life for the children." But I realize I have a big gap, her entire life before we met. The invitation, clearly an olive branch extended after the initial confrontation, visibly touched Helen. I'd love to, she replied, her voice betraying contained emotion. I have materials that would perfectly complete this collection. Great, Henry smiled, relieved by the truce. Perhaps you could come back for a family dinner next week. The children would be happy to have their aunt around more regularly. Before Helen could respond, Beatrice appeared with one of her drawings, a colourful representation of several figures holding hands under what appeared to be the yellow trumpet tree in the garden. To everyone's surprise, among the familiar figures of her siblings, father and Eleanor, there was a new addition, a woman with dark hair identified by a childish caption as Aunt Helen. "It's our family," the girl simply explained, handing the drawing to her aunt. "Are you too?" The innocent gesture broke the last barriers. Helen knelt to her niece's level, hugging her with genuine emotion. "Thank you, dear. I'll keep it forever." When Helen finally said goodbye hours later, after spending the day interacting with her nieces and nephews, her attitude had completely transformed. For Eleanor, that visit represented another layer of healing, not just for the children, but for the entire family network affected by Claire's loss. "Thank you," Henry said quietly after Helen left. Promising to return the following week with her memory treasures, you turned what could have been a disaster into a reconciliation. "We're all learning to make space for different forms of grief," Eleanor replied. Helen also lost someone irreplaceable. She just needed validation and inclusion in the memory process. That night, after the children were in bed, Eleanor found Henry on the veranda, contemplating the stars with a thoughtful expression. "I've thought a lot about your proposal," she said, referring to the offer of a permanent position he had made weeks earlier. "About staying permanently." Henry turned to her, a cautious expectation in his gaze. "And have you come to a conclusion?" "I believe we still have a lot of work to do together," she replied carefully. "But I also believe that the ultimate goal should be independence, yours and the children's. You shouldn't depend permanently on me or anyone outside the family." "What if—" Henry hesitated, clearly navigating uncomfortable emotional territory. "What if it's not just a matter of need? What if it's a matter of choice? Of wanting your presence, not just needing it?" The question hung between them, laden with implications they both felt but were not yet ready to fully articulate. Eleanor felt her heart quicken, recognizing the subtle shift in dynamics that had been growing in recent weeks, a mutual respect that was gradually transforming into something more complex and potentially deeper. "I think we need to give it time," she finally replied. "Your family is in a process of rebuilding. Permanent decisions should come from a place of stability, not gratitude or emotional dependence." Henry nodded, accepting the wisdom of that approach. "So we'll stick with the renewal for now?" "Another 3 months." "Another 3 months," Eleanor confirmed. "And then we'll reevaluate with clarity and honesty." As they watched the starry Greenwich sky together, Eleanor reflected on the extraordinary journey of the past few months. The mansion that once seemed an impenetrable fortress of contained pain had transformed into a space of gradual healing, of emotional expression, of reconnection with previously avoided memories. The children, who initially greeted her with traps and tests, now included her in their family drawings, confided their vulnerabilities to her, and returned the care when she herself needed it. Henry, who had hidden in work to avoid the overwhelming pain of loss, gradually rediscovered his identity as a father, rediscovered the joy of being present in his children's lives. And Eleanor, who initially accepted the professional challenge out of financial necessity and personal purpose, discovered each day that that family had filled a void in her own life that she hadn't even fully recognized. In the garden, the small yellow trumpet tree swayed gently in the night breeze, a silent promise of continuous growth, of roots deepening while branches reached for the sky. A perfect symbol for the journey they shared, honoring what was lost while embracing with cautious hope what was yet to come. The 3 additional months of Eleanor's contract turned into 6, then 9. Before anyone realized it, almost a year had passed since that first interview at the Montgomery Mansion gate. The house once known as the Nanny Graveyard was now a reference in the community as an example of family resilience. On an autumn morning, As golden leaves gently fell over the garden, Eleanor received correspondence that would change the course of her journey. The stamped envelope, with the logo of the National Institute for Special Education, contained the result of an application she had submitted months earlier, almost forgotten amidst the intensity of her work with the Montgomery family. Sitting on the veranda, where the yellow trumpet tree, now considerably larger, displayed its first flowers of the season, Eleanor opened the letter with trembling fingers. "Dear Miss Finch," the formal text began, "we are pleased to inform you that your application for the position of Director of Research in Inclusive Methodologies has been approved. The board was particularly impressed with your innovative work in emotional interventions for grieving children, documented in your recent academic paper." The world seemed to freeze momentarily. The mentioned paper was based on her experience with the Montgomerys, evidently anonymous in the text, but every page imbued with the lessons she had learned from Michael, the twins, Leo, Beatrice, and Henry. Eleanor had submitted the work to a specialized journal almost as a personal catharsis, a way to process the extraordinary journey they shared. She never imagined it would open the doors to what had been her professional dream for years, a position that would allow her to influence national educational policies, train professionals, and expand the impact of her approach to thousands of children across the country. It was everything she had ever wanted, and it was 1,000 miles away in Washington, D.C. "Eleanor," Henry's voice interrupted her swirling thoughts. "Is everything okay? You look pale." She looked up, meeting Henry's now familiar face. In recent months, their relationship had evolved into something neither of them had the courage to fully name. A deep friendship woven with threads of something potentially more significant, carefully maintained in a respectful limbo as the family continued its healing process. "I received an offer," she replied, extending the letter. "From the National Institute." Henry read in silence, his face a neutral mask that revealed nothing of the thoughts behind it. When he finished, he returned the letter with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "This is extraordinary. Eleanor, congratulations, it's a well-deserved honor." "Thank you," she replied, painfully aware of what remained unsaid between them. "It's an opportunity I didn't expect to receive, at least not so soon." Henry nodded, sitting in the chair beside her on the veranda. For a few minutes they watched the garden together in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. "The children will be devastated," he finally said, his voice low. "You've become an essential part of their lives, and they of mine," Eleanor confessed, feeling a lump in her throat. "But I always knew my role here was temporary. The goal was always to help them find balance again, not to become indispensable. And you succeeded in that," Henry acknowledged. "They are transformed. All of us are." The preceding months had in fact been a period of remarkable transformations. Michael, now 15, had formed a small band at school, using music as a form of emotional expression. His grades had improved significantly, and adolescent rebellion gave way to a precocious but healthy maturity, no longer forced by the weight of premature responsibility, but nurtured by restored emotional security. The twins, Louisa and Laura, now 10, had transformed their secret code into a creative project that impressed their language teachers. Recently, they had won a regional literature contest with a bilingual story that subtly honored their mother's linguistic memory. Leo, at 7, made steady progress with his dyslexia, using adaptive techniques that transformed what was once a barrier into merely a different way of processing information. His interest in dinosaurs had evolved into a broader scientific curiosity, with Rex still a constant companion, but now sharing space with illustrated books about the universe and nature. Beatrice, turning 5, had blossomed from a silent and isolated child into a talkative little artist, whose colorful drawings decorated every available surface of the house. Her precocious talent for visual arts was being nurtured with special classes, where she mainly created vibrant works in yellow, her permanent connection to her mother's memory, and Henry. His transformation was perhaps the deepest of all. The workaholic executive who barely knew his own children's routine now balanced his career with genuine family presence. He had reduced his hours at the office, delegated responsibilities, and even declined a promotion that would require more travel. His priorities had completely realigned. The mansion, once a monument to loss, had become a true home. noisy, sometimes chaotic, but vibrant with life and shared memories. Claire's studio remained a sacred space, but no longer an untouchable sanctuary. It was visited regularly, naturally incorporated into family life. Helen, the previously distant aunt, was now a constant presence, bringing new dimensions to Claire's memories and building her own relationship with her nieces and nephews. "When would you need to leave?" Henry asked, breaking the contemplative silence. "The program starts in 6 weeks," Eleanor replied, studying the letter again. "I'd need to move to Washington, D.C. within a month." A month? The reality of the deadline hung between them like a physical presence. "I need to speak with the children," she finally said. "They deserve to hear it directly. From me and with enough time to process the change." Henry nodded, his expression a complex mixture of pride and something that seemed like contained sadness. "Let's gather everyone tonight for a special dinner." "You can tell them then." The news was received exactly as expected, with initial shock followed by a wave of raw emotions. Michael, demonstrating the maturity he had developed, was the first to recover from the impact. "It's an incredible recognition of your work," he said, clearly struggling to find the positive side. "You'll be able to help many other children." The twins cried openly, abandoning their newly acquired sophistication for a moment of pure vulnerability. "But who will learn our language now?" Louisa asked between sobs. "And who will help us with the illustrated dictionary project?" Laura added. Leo, clutching Rex as he hadn't in months, asked with a trembling voice, "You'll visit us, won't you, Aunt Eleanor?" But it was Beatrice, with her silent perceptiveness, who asked the hardest question of all, "Don't you like us anymore?" Eleanor felt her heart break with those words. She moved her chair to the center of the room, opening her arms to gather the children in a collective hug. "Listen carefully," she said, her voice firm despite the emotion. "What we are experiencing now is different from the loss you suffered before. I'm not leaving because I want to abandon you, nor because something terrible has happened. I'm pursuing a professional path that can help many other children using what I've learned from you. And more importantly, this does not mean I am leaving your lives. But you won't be here every day," Michael observed, verbalizing the obvious. "I won't be physically present every day," Eleanor corrected. "But there are many ways to remain present in the lives of those we love. Your mother showed you that, didn't she? She is still present in so many aspects of your lives. The mention of Claire, now possible without paralyzing pain, created a moment of connection among everyone in the room. Besides," Eleanor continued, "Washington, D.C. isn't that far. There are holidays, long weekends, and technology. We can video call, exchange messages." "It's not the same," Leo protested, his voice small. "No, it's not," Eleanor honestly agreed. "It will be different. But different doesn't necessarily mean worse, just new. And you've all already proven that you are extraordinarily adaptable to new scenarios." The following weeks were an emotional roller coaster. Eleanor balanced preparations for her move with the extra care the children clearly needed. Each day became precious, each moment together charged with additional meaning. On a particularly significant afternoon, while helping Beatrice with a new drawing, Eleanor noticed that the girl was creating something different from her usual works. Instead of colorful family scenes, she worked on a handmade book, stitching pages with the intense concentration of an artist far beyond her 5 years. "What are you doing, Bee?" Eleanor asked, using the affectionate nickname the family had adopted. "A memory book," the girl replied, continuing her meticulous work. "So you don't forget us?" Eleanor felt a lump in her throat. "I would never forget you, dear." "Mommy didn't want to forget either," Beatrice explained with the direct logic of children. "That's why she kept diaries for each of you. Uncle Michael told me." The wisdom of that observation struck Eleanor deeply. In the weeks that followed, each child, in their own way, created some kind of keepsake for Eleanor to take with her. Michael composed a song, his first original composition, hesitantly recorded on a flash drive after many attempts at perfection. "For when you need to remember that you turned a grumpy teenager into an almost musician," he wrote on the card accompanying the gift. The twins produced an illustrated dictionary of their private language, with carefully translated entries and etymologies, noted with precocious academic precision. "Now you can practice even when you're far away," they explained. "And when we see each other again, We'll test your vocabulary. Leo, with Henry's help, created a miniature replica of Rex, perfectly detailed and accompanied by a laboriously handwritten letter. Each letter formed with the extra effort his dyslexia required, a doubly significant gift. Beatrice's book, when finished, proved to be a surprising work of art. Each page an explosion of color and memory, depicting specific moments shared with Eleanor. The last page showed two houses connected by a rainbow, with the childish caption, "Always connected." Henry maintained an emotional distance during those weeks, as if establishing preventive boundaries. Only occasionally did Eleanor catch him observing her with an expression she couldn't fully decipher, a mixture of admiration, gratitude, and something deeper that both avoided naming. On the eve of her departure, after the children had finally fallen asleep, later than usual, each finding reasons to prolong the night, Henry invited Eleanor for a last conversation on the veranda. The yellow trumpet tree, illuminated by strategically placed garden lights, created an almost magical atmosphere against the Greenwich night sky. "I have something for you," he said, handing her a thick envelope. "It's not as creative as the children's gifts, but I hope it means something." Inside the envelope, Eleanor found legal documents and a key. "The accessible apartment downtown," Henry explained, noticing her confused expression. "I bought it for you. Before you protest, it's not exactly a gift. Consider it an investment in your permanent connection with Greenwich, a place to come back to whenever you can." Eleanor was speechless, the gesture surpassing all expectations. "Henry, I can't." "You can and you should," he interrupted gently. "During this year, you gave us much more than professional services, Eleanor. You gave us back the ability to function as a family, to feel joy again, to honor Claire's memory without being paralyzed by grief." He paused, organizing clearly rehearsed thoughts. "I understand why you need to accept this position. It's an opportunity to broaden your impact, to transform other lives as you transformed ours. It would be selfish to ask you to stay when the world needs what you have to offer. But I want you to know that this will always be your home too, that there will always be a place for you here, in our lives, in our hearts." The words hung between them, laden with implications that remained unspoken. Eleanor felt tears form in her eyes, emotion finally breaking her professional composure. "You transformed me as much as I transformed you," she admitted, her voice trembling. "When I arrived here, I was so focused on my professional identity, on proving my worth despite my physical limitations. I didn't realize how much I still defined myself by loss, by the chair, by what I couldn't do. You reminded me that I am much more than my limitations." Henry extended his hand, covering hers gently. "You taught us that we are more than our losses." It seems the lesson was reciprocal. A comfortable silence settled between them, filled only by the night sounds of the garden and the occasional rustle of the trumpet tree leaves. "There's something I need to ask," Henry finally said. "Something I've avoided out of respect for your professional role in this house." Eleanor felt her heart quicken, anticipating the question. If circumstances were different, if we had met in another context, another time, would you consider— "Yes," she replied before he could complete it. The simplicity of the answer, eliminating the need for elaboration. Henry's eyes met hers, a mutual understanding passing between them. "That makes it both easier and harder at the same time," he commented with a bittersweet smile. "Easier because we know there's something real here," Eleanor elaborated. "Harder because the timing isn't right." "Yet," Henry added, a single word laden with possibility, "the timing isn't right yet." The morning of her departure arrived with the inevitable weight of moments we know we will remember forever. Eleanor's bags were in the entrance hall, each carefully containing the children's gifts, protected among her clothes and belongings. Breakfast was a valiant attempt at normalcy, with forcedly animated conversations about the future, planned visits, scheduled video calls, the promise of a reunion during the July school holidays. When the accessible taxi finally arrived, the farewell everyone had tried to mentally rehearse proved much more difficult in reality. Michael, trying to maintain the posture of a mature teenager, was the first to break, hugging Eleanor with surprising strength. The twins followed, speaking simultaneously in a mix of English and their private code. Leo buried his face against Rex, but still reached out his arms for a long hug. Beatrice, who in recent days had regressed slightly into her previous silence, simply held Eleanor's hand and placed a small yellow seed in it. "From the trumpet tree," she explained in a low voice. "For you to plant in Washington, D.C., to remember." Henry remained slightly apart, granting the children their moment. When he finally approached, words seemed inadequate. Instead of trying to find them, he simply hugged Eleanor, silently communicating what they both knew existed between them. A potential, a future possibility, a door deliberately left ajar. "This isn't goodbye," Eleanor finally said, looking at each face around her. "It's just until we meet again. Remember what we learned together. Physical distance doesn't diminish true emotional connections. And what we built here is very real and very strong." The taxi departed, taking Eleanor along the same winding road that had brought her to the Montgomery mansion almost a year earlier. Through the rear window, she watched the family gathered at the gate, no longer fragmented by pain, but united in their newfound ability to face changes and losses together. The final twist in her journey with the Montgomerys came 3 months later, when Eleanor was already settled in Washington, D.C., immersed in her new work at the Institute. An unexpected call interrupted her afternoon of research. "Eleanor Finch?" asked an unfamiliar female voice. "Yes, that's me. This is Dr. Marianne Foster from the National Commission on Disability Policy. We're organizing an international conference on inclusive methodologies, and your name was highly recommended to lead the panel on emotional interventions in educational contexts." Eleanor felt a wave of professional surprise and gratification. "I'm honored, Dr. Foster. When and where will the event be?" "In July at the Greenwich Convention Center. The city was chosen specifically for the pioneering accessibility program they recently implemented. We await your confirmation by the end of the week." Greenwich. In the exact period she had promised to visit the children. The universe, apparently, had its own sense of timing. When she hung up the phone, Eleanor found herself smiling at the small yellow trumpet tree seedling that grew in a pot on her balcony. Beatrice's seed had germinated quickly, as if eager to establish roots in its new home. Beside it, on a specially installed shelf, the children's gifts occupied a place of honor. The flash drive with Michael's music, the twins' illustrated dictionary, Leo's mini Rex, Beatrice's handmade book. Her phone rang again, a video call from the number she immediately recognized as the mansion's. Upon answering, she was greeted by 5 smiling faces squeezing to fit on the screen. "Aunt Eleanor!" Leo exclaimed, Rex visible in the foreground. "Guess what? I won the school science fair with my dinosaur project, and we were selected for the language exchange program," the twins announced in perfect synchronicity. "My band is playing at the city festival," Michael shared, a discreet pride in his voice. "I made a new drawing for you," Beatrice said, holding up an explosion of colors that Eleanor couldn't fully distinguish on the small screen. "And I," Henry added, appearing briefly in the background before giving space to the children again, to have news about that project we discussed. As she absorbed the avalanche of updates, Eleanor felt a certainty grow within her. Her departure hadn't ended the story they shared. It had only begun a new chapter. The Montgomery family, who once desperately needed her help to function, now flourished independently, each member finding their own path while maintaining the connection with the others. And as for herself, the woman who had arrived at that mansion determined to prove her professional worth despite her physical limitations, she had discovered much more than professional satisfaction. She had found a fundamental truth that she now shared with educators across the country. No wheelchair, no loss, no physical circumstance could limit the human capacity to transform lives through authentic presence and genuine emotional connection. As the animated faces on the screen continued sharing stories, plans and achievements, Eleanor smiled to herself, anticipating the reunion that would happen in July. She wasn't sure exactly where that path would lead her, whether it would eventually bring her back permanently to the Montgomery mansion, whether life would continue divided between two worlds, whether the unexplored potential with Henry would blossom into something more defined. But she was absolutely sure of one thing. Unlike the 17 nannies who came before her, she hadn't given up when confronted with the seemingly impossible. And that choice, to remain present even when difficult, vulnerable even when frightening, authentic even when painful, had transformed not only a family broken by loss, but also a woman who was still learning the extent of her own strength. Outside, on her small balcony in Washington, D.C., the yellow trumpet tree sapling extended its first leaves towards the sun, its roots firmly established in the soil of its new home, while holding the promise of future blooms that would connect, across time and distance, two places that were now part of a single, continuous journey. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Eleanor and the Montgomery family has touched your hearts. To continue this emotional journey, we've prepared a special playlist with equally captivating stories. Find it here by clicking on the left. If you enjoyed this narrative, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and like the video. Every day we bring unique stories that explore the complexity of life and the power of human resilience. Don't miss our next content. We look forward to reading your comments and knowing which part of this story touched your heart the most.